Chapter 697. The steady and heavy force field completely confined all the doctor's actions and firmly limited his counterattack. The doctor's brain was already in a mess. Military counselor. He didn't wonder why military counselor came here. When Li Tianlan first appeared in front of the people in the dark world, Samsara Palace unabashedly showed its full support for him. Such support could be said to be almost at any cost. Now Samsara Palace was destroyed and the master of Samsara Palace died, but Qin Weibai's existence still carried out the will of Samsara Palace. Ensaint's statement in Yuzhou also confirmed this fact. East Emperor Palace became Emperor Dong's palace. Obviously, part of the remaining power of Samsara Palace would be absorbed by Emperor Dong's palace. Military counselor and saint would have a closer relationship with Li Tianlan in the future. In this respect, military counselor and giant group could also be said to be on the same side. At least they were sufficiently loyal allies. If the hospital was in trouble, he would certainly not stand by. But what frightened the doctor was the timing of military counselor's appearance. It was the 11th minute since the battle began. Military counselor entered. This timing was too precise and timely. It couldn't be a coincidence that he joined the battlefield at such a time. It even gave people a feeling that military counselor had been near the hospital. At this moment, the doctor thought of military counselor's words. "You are surrounded." A chill suddenly swept through the doctor's heart. If the encirclement was true, what did it mean? This meant that the hospital might not have been prepared for this attack, but the military counselor had completely expected their action, so he had set up an ambush nearby in advance. When they were full of confidence in killing in the hospital, the military counselor had already surrounded them with his men. The doctor's body trembled and his face turned pale. He was not afraid of death. But he couldn't figure out why military counselor could grasp their action. This time, the Burning Legion accepted the employment without leaking any information in advance. How did military counselor know that they would attack the hospital? Had the all-pervasive intelligence system of Samsara Palace already perceived the relationship between Kunlun City and the Burning Legion? But even so, military counselor couldn't know their specific action. Or rather, what else did he know? The doctor's heart suddenly sank. He seemed to think of something and his whole body struggled wildly in the power field. Dense thunderbolts roared and surged around him, and the stable power field gently shook under the impact of the thunderbolts. The military counselor remained calm. He was a real top figure at the peak of the half-step invincible realm. In terms of realm alone, he was like Li Tianlan, Gong Sunqi, Wei Kunlun and Dijiang before the breakthrough, or Wang Xiaoyao. The top of the half-step invincible realm was the combat capability of the invincible realm. Military counselor was no longer young, and there was no hope for him to break through to the invincible realm. But after years of tempering his strength, he had already perfected it. Now this field created by pure strength was his domain, and it was not much worse than the domain of the real invincible realm. It's useless. Military counselor looked at the doctor who was struggling crazily and said indifferently, "You know that you can't break free. Your strength lies in hiding. I saw the process of your raid and the direction was very clear. Someone must have snuck into the hospital in advance and set up the explosives. They also found out the location of many important people. You are the only one in the Burning Legion who can do this. Soul Shadow, you shouldn't have refused Sai City's invitation. If a natural assassin like you had joined Sai City, things would have been different today." Soul Shadow. This was the code name of the doctor who quietly crossed the battlefield and entered the ward in the dark world. Soul Shadow, who was constantly struggling, suddenly stiffened. It was normal for military counselor to know his code name, but he didn't expect that military counselor also knew that he had refused Sai City's invitation. Soul Shadow suddenly felt extremely frightened. He looked at military counselor and opened his mouth with fear in his eyes. "Do you need me to tell you the code name you used before?" Military counselor looked at Soul Shadow with cold eyes. He really knew everything. Soul Shadow's body shook and he stared at military counselor. "Military counselor, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Military counselor didn't continue to attack. He just said calmly, "You have another choice." The sentence was full of hints. Soul Shadow's eyes were in a trance for a moment. Military counselor looked at him with cold and deep eyes. "I see." Soul Shadow suddenly laughed, and his expression became a little relaxed. At this moment, the thing he was most worried about became the least thing he needed to worry about. Because it was obvious that military counselor knew the truth, but he didn't want others to know that he knew the truth. The truth was sometimes too horrible. At least now, Emperor Dong's palace couldn't afford to say it. "I'll keep this in mind." Military counselor took a deep look at Soul Shadow and said calmly, "It doesn't matter." Soul Shadow chuckled and said, "What we need most is time." Military counselor snorted and didn't say anything. The battle outside was still going on. More violent gunshots sounded downstairs, which had been quiet. Obviously, the reinforcements brought by military counselor were fighting with the super elites of the Burning Legion who were below the Thundershocking realm. Soul Shadow was silent for a moment and asked, "You knew we would come?" "Just in case. This place is so important, so we have to keep a hand. But I didn't expect someone to be so stupid." Military counselor's eyes flashed with disbelief. Obviously, he didn't mean Soul Shadow when he said stupid. "He's really stupid, which surprised us," Soul Shadow said with a smile, "and it can be foreseen that he will continue to be stupid." "Poor thing," military counselor said calmly. "Pathetic." Soul Shadow sighed slightly. "But this is exactly what I want," military counselor said slowly. Soul Shadow understood. Maybe this was the reason why military counselor chose not to know the truth. He nodded and said, "It's a good choice." Military counselor didn't say anything. Soul Shadow smiled and said softly, "Then, goodbye." "Goodbye," military counselor said calmly. Soul Shadow closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In an instant, his body began to swell in the force field. The most powerful force gathered in his body and turned into dazzling lightning. In an instant, the bones and muscles of Soul Shadow's whole body were completely shattered. This was his other choice. Military counselor knew the truth, but he didn't want Li Tianlan to know. With his strength, it was not difficult to capture Soul Shadow alive after imprisoning him. But the problem was that if he wanted to cover up the truth completely, Soul Shadow couldn't be alive. Military counselor couldn't take action. It was doubtful that he killed someone when he could have captured him alive. So Soul Shadow could only choose to die by himself, and he did it in the most unyielding way. 1 second. His body swelled. 1 second later, endless lightning burst out in military counselor's force field, along with surging flesh and bone fragments. Military counselor didn't stop it. At the moment when the lightning surged with flesh and blood, he slowly reached out his hand and pressed down hard on the force field that imprisoned Soul Shadow. The whole force field suddenly began to shrink. The space inside the ward was distorted in a state visible to the naked eye. Military counselor took a step forward. Whoosh! The frenzied airflow in the ward turned into a hurricane. The lightning that Soul Shadow was determined to break out in the force field suddenly stopped. In the fierce wind, the transparent but extremely thick force field suddenly began to compress. The force field became smaller and smaller, containing the majestic power and infinite lightning. It shrank the flesh and blood of Soul Shadow and finally turned into a sphere. Military counselor raised his eyebrows and moved his palms slightly. The spherical force field with great destructive power landed in his hands. It flickered with a faint blue light, like a sparkling and translucent crystal. Military counselor breathed a sigh of relief. The next second, a large mouthful of blood sprayed directly from his mouth. His body went limp. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." He almost fell to the ground. Bai Qingqian, who had been watching all this, was slightly shocked and subconsciously supported military counselor. She frowned slightly and said, "You're injured?" Even if she didn't understand martial arts, she knew military counselor's status in the dark world. Military counselor couldn't be injured in any case if he killed an ordinary Thundershocking realm expert. Military counselor smiled bitterly, shook his head and didn't speak. His injuries were all old injuries. At that time, the 4 strongest supermasters of Samsara Palace lurked in Mount Dibbing and were seriously injured by summer solstice in an instant. That was the injury left before the chaos in Eastern Europe began, and it still hadn't improved until today. Now military counselor reluctantly took action. The old injury suddenly broke out. Military counselor looked at his watch and took a deep breath. "It's hard for me to take action next. But it's almost time." "You didn't surround them at all, did you?" Bai Qingqian suddenly asked. Military counselor was stunned. Bai Qingqian said blandly, "If you really had the power to destroy them, you wouldn't have done it yourself." Military counselor was injured. If he was really sure tonight, he wouldn't have done it himself. The other people of Samsara Palace were enough to solve everything. "Yes." Military counselor smiled bitterly. "The encirclement is real, but it's also fake. Such an encirclement really exists, but its strength is not strong. We underestimated the strength of the Burning Legion and didn't know enough about their internal intelligence. It's hard for the people I brought to kill the Burning Legion, but at least we can delay Yuzhou to respond. You knew they were coming? Bai Qingqian's eyes were a little sharp. Why didn't you inform us in advance? We could have made enough preparations. Military counselor was silent for a while. He didn't know what to say. Many people died in the hospital tonight. To some extent, it could be avoided as long as he informed them in advance. But the problem was that military counselor really couldn't inform the hospital in advance to be prepared. It was not that he didn't want to. He couldn't. All the deaths in the hospital were to cover up the truth that Soul Shadow would rather die than hide. It was cruel. But it was necessary. Believe me, military counselor said blandly, you don't want to know the answer. Is this your explanation? Bai Qingqian asked softly. Military counselor didn't speak. He didn't need to explain anything to Bai Qingqian, but the most troublesome thing was that he had to explain to Li Tianlan next. And the answer he gave Bai Qingqian would obviously not satisfy Li Tianlan. Why did these people attack the hospital? Bai Qingqian was silent for a while and suddenly asked. Military counselor still didn't answer. He reluctantly stood up and walked to the door. The blue orb flickered more and more rapidly in his hand. Military counselor stood in the corridor and took a look. In front of him were the elites of the hospital. And a little ahead, the Burning Legion was fiercely tearing the defense line of the hospital. Military counselor narrowed his eyes. He raised his hand and directly threw the ball shining with blue light in his hand. The ball flew across the corridor and landed in the crowd of the Burning Legion. Boom! In the loud roar, the magnificent field and the endless lightning collided and burst out in an instant. Blood rained. Several elites of the Burning Legion were blown to pieces on the spot, and 2 Thundershocking Realm experts were seriously injured. Radel, who had rushed to the 9th floor, was covered in blood. He roared and his fighting spirit soared. Further away, outside the hospital, the endless army had madly rushed over. Radel, whose face was full of killing intent, shook his fat body and was about to continue charging. In the communicator, the voice of Schiller, the deputy commander of the Burning Legion, sounded, Radel, retreat. What? Radel roared, we still have time. There is no time. The reinforcements of the Samsara Palace are rushing over. We need time to break through. The operation has failed. Schiller gritted his teeth. Retreat now, this is an order. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 698. Retreat. An extremely firm order was hurriedly and clearly transmitted into the ears of every Burning Legion member. Everyone could feel the grievance in Schiller's voice. They broke into the hospital smoothly and approached the inpatient building like a hot knife through butter. Led by Vajra Radel, the number 1 inpatient building had already reached the 9th floor where the target was. Schiller was already halfway to the top floor of the number 2 inpatient building. The target's gathering place was 20 meters ahead of them. But at this time they had to retreat. To be honest, Schiller didn't know how much resistance they would encounter during their retreat, but he didn't dare to bet on it. With their strength tonight, if they were to continue fighting, they would be able to take care of at least half of the targets in 3 minutes. But they were also destined to pay an unimaginable price. And such a price wasn't something the Burning Legion could afford. Tonight's raid had mobilized most of the Burning Legion's high-end combat power. If these people were left in Yuzhou, the Burning Legion would only exist in name except for Ramelin, the Legion commander. A plan to weaken the support around Li Tianlan wasn't worth the entire Burning Legion dying with them. So retreat. They had to retreat. A few minutes seemed insignificant, but in a battle behind enemy lines, a few seconds was often enough to determine life and death. So the moment he made up his mind, Schiller didn't hesitate at all and quickly turned around to retreat. He was so determined to retreat that he didn't even look back until his figure disappeared. The Burning Legion experts who raided the number 2 inpatient building reacted at the same time and quickly retreated. Kill. Kill them all, our reinforcements are here. In the number 2 inpatient building, a thunder-shocking realm elder of Jade Pool who was in charge of the hospital defense roared and chased after them with the remaining elites of the hospital. Violent gunshots rang out incessantly downstairs. The whole hospital was full of flashing lights and shadows, and countless bullets whistled through the light and shadows. The 15th minute. The Burning Legion rushed out of the inpatient building and met the reinforcements brought by military counselor. A fierce battle broke out in an instant and ended quickly. The 16th minute. The experts of the Burning Legion gathered and directly penetrated the reinforcements' formation in just a few dozen seconds. They retreated all the way. Blood was everywhere. The 17th minute. The Burning Legion retreated from the hospital. Almost at the same time. Kunlun City, the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, the National Security Agency, the Shadow Sting Army, the Shadow Sect, the Garrison Force of Yuzhou, and nearly 10,000 people directly rushed into the hospital. The Burning Legion collided with the vanguard of Yuzhou. The 19th minute. The Burning Legion successfully retreated from the battlefield. The 20th minute. The Parliament of Jianghu State, the Army Headquarters, Kunlun City, the National Security Agency, the Police Department and many other departments jointly issued an arrest warrant. Countless forces of Jianghu State, whether overt or covert, took action at the first time. At the same time, they blocked airports, stations and all traffic intersections. Operation Codename, Dragnet. President Li Huaqing of Jianghu State, who had just returned to Yuzhou from Lin, and personally ordered that the thugs who dared to commit murder in Yuzhou must pay the price. 25th minute. The news of the fall of Tiannan and the attack on Jianghu State spread out in all directions, directly turning into a frenzy that swept the entire Dark World. Burning Legion. There was no doubt that it was the protagonist of the Dark World tonight. This was a force that had been quietly accepting employment from various parties in Africa. They were powerful but not many people paid much attention to them. Overnight they appeared in front of everyone with their strongest stance. People were shocked. The Burning Legion's high-end combat strength was terrifying, and it also shocked the Burning Legion's overall quality. Nearly 20 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts raided Yuzhou. 2 half-step Invincible Realm experts. Several Thunder-Shocking Realm experts. And ordinary Thunder-Shocking Realm experts. Few forces in the entire Dark World could offer such power. Such a lineup was enough to explain everything. Many forces that had traded with the Burning Legion in Africa didn't know that there were so many experts in the Burning Legion. What was even more surprising was that when these experts were lurking in Yuzhou, Ramiro could lead the Burning Legion to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and defeat the Freedom Corps that had dominated Tiannan for several years. During the whole process, Ramiro didn't even make a move. This was a Burning Legion without experts. In the Battle of Tiannan, the most important thing was the combat strength of ordinary elites. When these most basic combat strengths were gathered, they formed a force that could impact everything. The Freedom Corps was an elite that Jianghu State and the Wang family of Beihai had secretly cultivated for several years. Among them there was even a part of the Thunderbolt Battalion. Whether in terms of personnel quality or equipment, it could be said to be the best. However, such a Freedom Corps lost to the Burning Legion when the number of people was almost the same. This was enough to show the powerful combat strength of the Burning Legion. Now it was obvious that they had the support of Annan State. The southern area of Tiannan could be regarded as the foundation of the Burning Legion. What did this mean? An Invincible Realm expert was in charge, sufficient high-end combat strength, elite grassroots forces and a solid foundation. All of this combined, there was only one name for such a force in the Dark World. Super Force. Like the Wang family of Beihai, like the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, like the former Jiang family of South America, the Heroes Club, and even the Shadow Throne, Super Force. Even the former Samsara Palace couldn't be regarded as a super force. But now, when most of the super forces had lost their supreme combat power, a new super force had appeared in front of everyone in the Dark World in the most powerful manner, almost without warning. Some people were excited, some were frightened, some were ready to make a move and some were eyeing covetously. But at this moment, more people in the Dark World were silent. Because of strangeness. Today's Dark World seemed to have become more and more strange. The feeling of alternation was so obvious. Most of the familiar Invincible Realm experts had died, and those who were still alive were seriously injured. The new Invincible Realm experts were replacing the light of the former Invincible Realm experts. The former super forces were also gradually quieting down. And the new super force was rising. There were more new Invincible Realm experts. The Burning Legion was definitely not the only new super force. The huge impact seemed to hit everyone in the Dark World with a brand new power. Arsis, Casrotter, King Tong, Jiang Chensong, Charlemagne. The names that used to shine in the Dark World had completely dimmed, become memories and become the past. A new chapter had begun. So all the memories in the past were clearly turned over, and then became history. At this moment, everyone in the Dark World stood at the intersection of the old and the new eras. They felt the clear and obvious changes that were getting faster and faster. Their minds were complicated and they were at a loss. The old era was over. The old era was completely over. The 30th minute. Linton. Late at night. Lonely Mountain. Most people had left. Li Tianlan, who was chatting with Wang Xingxiao, finally received news from Tiannan and Yuzhou. One in the south and the other in the north. The news on both sides was completely synchronized. Almost all the people who were still on Lonely Mountain received the news. For a moment, the ringing of mobile phones surrounded almost everyone's ears. Li Baidian, who had just fallen asleep, almost rushed out in exasperation. He gritted his teeth and came to Li Tianlan's side. He lowered his voice, but it was trembling and a little distorted because of anger. Tianlan, something happened in Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace was raided by the Burning Legion. His voice was very slow, as if he was suppressing the anger and killing intent in his heart. Our headquarters was destroyed. Emperor Dong's palace suffered heavy casualties. F***CK. 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 I'll kill all those bastards. In the past few months, Li Baidian had put in a lot of effort in Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace finally had a prototype, but tonight, everything went back to square one, and the graduates they brought out from the two academies were even more seriously injured. This knife was almost stabbed in the chest of the new Emperor Dong's palace. Blood was dripping and it was extremely cruel. Li Baidian's whole body was trembling. His breathing was rapid and everything in front of him seemed to be spinning. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly and was silent for a long time. He had received the news. Not only did all the efforts of Emperor Dong's palace in Tiannan go to waste, but the hospital of the giant group in Yuzhou was also raided. Nearly 20 thunder-shocking realm experts were attacked. If military counselor hadn't led people to delay them, not only Emperor Dong's palace, but almost all the help around Li Tianlan would have been affected. It was Dongqing Wudi who brought him the news. Dongqing Wudi had set off for Yuzhou as soon as he received the news. Li Tianlan's brain tried hard to digest the information. The sudden outbreak of anger and coldness had been suppressed by him, and now he was terrifyingly calm. This is not an accident. Li Tianlan said lightly. Of course it's not an accident. Li Baidian growled and there were even tears in his eyes. More and more people gathered around him. Li Baidian, Ning Qianxing, Lin Yuxian, Yu Qingyan, Yu Donglai, Qin Weibai, Wei Kunlun, the last remaining old people of the Li family. Exclamations rang out from around. Obviously they all received the same news. Countless eyes gathered on Li Tianlan. At this moment, everyone looked at him with complicated eyes. There must be a factor of Annan state in the Burning Legion's attack on Tiannan, but this is only part of it. If that's the case, it's normal for Emperor Dong's palace to be attacked. Li Tianlan took several deep breaths and then said lightly, but when the war in Tiannan broke out, our people in Yuzhou were also attacked. What does this mean? Annan state is targeting us. Li Baidian, who was confused, said subconsciously. Everyone shook their heads at the same time. Annan state did not completely control the Burning Legion. There is a force behind the Burning Legion that is targeting us. Qin Weibai said softly. Who could it be? Saint asked. Somehow his voice sounded a little dry. Li Tianlan gave him a meaningful look and said flatly, there's no need to guess. Just ask Ramelin. What? Everyone's heart trembled. Li Tianlan's eyes glanced around and fell on Zhou Yuanshan. He said calmly, brother-in-law, I need a special plane to Tiannan. Zhou Yuanshan hesitated and nodded. Li Tianlan turned around, looked at Saint and said lightly, contact military counselor for me. Chapter 699. Military counselor did not leave the hospital. When the video communication from Lin and was connected, the hospital behind him was still burning. Two severely tilted inpatient buildings were reflected on the screen, looking a little bleak. Military counselor's face was covered by a black cloak. In the burning light and shadow, he looked at Li Tianlan's calm expression on the screen, opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, Your Highness. How's the battle damage? Li Tianlan asked. This was a question that everyone was concerned about. It happened suddenly. Whether it was Tiannan or Yuzhou, they only passed on the most important information. There was no accurate number yet. Still counting. Military counselor took a deep breath, and his voice became more and more difficult. Then tell me what has been counted now. Li Tianlan said. In his sight, in the chaotic light and shadow, military counselor's body trembled obviously, and he did not speak for a while. This reaction was too obvious. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly sank, and he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Who's in trouble? Military counselor was silent for a while, slowly lowered his head, and said at an extremely slow speed, Mrs. Dongqing and Rushi are fine. Tribulation is fine. The four spirits are fine. The two sword masters of Mount Shu are also fine. Li Tianlan looked at him and his eyes flashed with threatening sharpness. Military counselor did not seem to know what to say, and finally smiled bitterly. In the hospital, more than 400 elites died in the battle, and the number of seriously injured is about twice as many as the number of people who died in the battle. Nearly half of them have been unable to recover their combat capability. Nearly 100 medical staff of the hospital were injured or killed, and a guest official and an elder of Mount Shu died in the battle. 2 guest officials of Jade Pool died in the battle. Jianghu of Shadow Sect died. His voice was getting lower and lower. But as he spoke, the atmosphere on the entire lonely mountain became depressing. Some people could not even stand steadily. 400 elites died in the battle, 400 elites who had completely lost their combat capability, and hundreds of medical staff were injured or killed. The defense power of the hospital was almost weakened by half. In addition, every staff member in the hospital was an elite in the same field, and some of them were real experts and professors poached by the giant group with their resources. The casualties of these people also greatly reduced the medical level of the hospital. As for the guest elder of Mount Shu and the guest elder of Jade Pool, as a famous swordsmanship force in Jianghu State, whether it was Mount Shu or Jade Pool, they needed hard strength to become a guest official. Thunder-shocking realm. This was the most basic threshold. As for the elders of the 2 superpowers, only the experts in the thunder-shocking realm could assume the post. There was also Shadow Sect's War Tiger. Overnight, just as military counselor said, 5 experts of the thunder-shocking realm had been killed. Li Tianlan clenched his teeth tightly. His voice was like the chilly wind blowing from the 9 serenities of hell, cold and awe-inspiring. What else? Chess Emperor is dead, and East Peak. The military counselor's voice stuttered a few times, which was very rare. Li Tianlan's body shook violently, and he held the tablet in his hand tightly. Chess Emperor. East Peak. This was the biggest loss of the night. Chess Emperor was an old member of the Li family, and he was the first guard of Li Kuangtu back then. His status could be imagined. If the Li family had not collapsed, after Li Honghe, Chess Emperor could be said to be the Li family's well-deserved first think tank in the new team with Li Kuangtu as the core. Chess Emperor had been following Li Honghe in recent years. Although he was Li Kuangtu's close guard, he was very kind to Li Tianlan. It could be said that he was one of Li Tianlan's most respected elders. In terms of strength, Chess Emperor was a genius. But his comprehensive strength might not be worse than military counselors. They were both top experts of the half-step invincible realm. In Mormon's 13 half-step invincible realm experts plus flaming fire formed the sword formation of 13-story buildings, and then there was the eternal sword of Samsara Palace Master. Among the 13 half-step invincible realm experts, Chess Emperor was one of them, and he was a very important member. And now, this man who was already in his 50s, who had dedicated most of his life to the Li family, who had promised him when he was a child that he would plan a great empire for him, died just like that. Not died in battle. But when he was at his weakest, when he was attacked by the enemy, he died in the hospital bed. He didn't even wake up from the coma until he died. How aggrieved he was. East Peak was a half-step invincible realm expert who was in the same ward with Chess Emperor. He was one of the trump cards of the Dongqing clan, and now he died just like that. 5 thunder-shocking realm experts. 2 half-step invincible realm experts. Nearly 1,000 elites. A sea of blood. Li Tianlan felt dizzy. Extreme anger surged and condensed in his heart and finally burst out. This seemed to be the first time he couldn't control his emotions at all. The majestic anger almost completely destroyed his reason in an instant. His voice was piercingly cold, like the ice that would never melt all year round. There was a trembling killing intent between the lines. Give me an explanation. Military counselor. His voice was extremely heavy. Since he entered the secular world, he had several contacts with military counselor. This was the first time he got angry at military counselor. In fact, military counselor didn't explicitly say that he would join the East Emperor Palace like Saint, but he couldn't help it. At this moment, Li Tianlan felt that the air he breathed was burning with fierce flames, almost burning him up. Military counselor could ambush in advance. Obviously, he had known that the hospital would be in danger. If he could inform the hospital in advance, Chess Emperor, East Peak and everyone else would not have died. There was no if. Military counselor didn't say it. So tonight they faced such a heavy loss, so heavy that no one could bear to look at it. It's my mistake. Military counselor was silent for a while and said hoarsely, I seriously underestimated the strength of the Burning Legion. I'm mainly responsible for this. This time. I was greedy and rash. I thought I could solve the problem with the power in my hands, so I didn't inform the hospital in advance. Saint had a complicated look in his eyes. Qin Weibai sighed quietly. Is this your explanation? Li Qianlan's voice was cold. It's my mistake. Military counselor lowered his head, and his voice became deeper. Investigate. Li Qianlan squeezed the tablet in his hand hard. His arms were shaking. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, I have no grudge against Ramiro. If there were no special reasons, he wouldn't target East Emperor Palace. But since he dared to stretch out his claws to me, he can forget about taking them back. Military counselor, I'll give you 3 days. I want the heads of all the murderers who attacked the hospital. Find them for me one by one. Understood. Military counselor took a deep breath. I'll do it right away. Li Tianlan directly hung up the communication. He glanced at Saint and said calmly, You go to Yuzhou. During this time, stay in the hospital. You don't want me to go with you to Tiannan? Saint frowned slightly. Li Tianlan had transferred his private plane as soon as the incident happened. With his temper, it was impossible for him not to fight back after being beaten. His trip to Tiannan was destined to be bloody. At this time, Saint wanted to stay with Li Tianlan, at least he could take care of him. No need. Li Qianlan's voice was cold. The hospital is more important. I can only rest assured if you are in Yuzhou. Saint wanted to say more, but Qin Weibai shook her head slightly at him. Then I'll go back to Yuzhou. She looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, Be careful. Li Qianlan's expression softened and he nodded. What about the private plane? He looked back at Zhou Yuanshan. It's arranged. The helicopter will land at the foot of the mountain in 15 minutes. Zhou Yuanshan said. Li Tianlan nodded. Let's go. Li Baidian, Ning Qianqing and Lin Yuxian. A group of young high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace followed Li Tianlan down the mountain at the same time. The last few veterans of the Li family looked at each other and followed Li Tianlan at the same time. The tablet that Li Tianlan had been holding in his hand suddenly lit up again. Li Tianlan picked up the video and raised his eyebrows slightly. It was a video of Li Huaqing. Tianlan, what do you think about what happened in Tiannan? Li Huaqing's voice was low and serious. I don't want to see it. Li Tianlan said faintly, an eye for an eye. Since the Burning Legion dared to take action, Ramelin should be prepared for revenge. I don't intend to swallow it. I just talked to Ziyuan on the phone. He just arrived in Tiannan, and the situation is not optimistic. Not only Emperor Dong's palace, but the Freedom Corps also suffered heavy losses. Tunan City has completely fallen, and the Freedom Corps has now retreated to Ningbian City. But judging from the current situation of the Burning Legion, they obviously don't intend to let it go. It is said that the Burning Legion has begun to gather troops and converge with the rebel army. It seems that they intend to take down Ningbian in one go. There was a hidden anger in Li Huaqing's voice. Ningbian was a city close to the border of Jianghu State. Once Ningbian fell after Tunan, it meant that Jianghu State lost control of Tiannan. All the forces of Jianghu State on the surface and in the dark would be kicked out of Tiannan. It would be very troublesome if they wanted to intervene in Tiannan in the future. Moreover, Jianghu State's investment in Tiannan in the past few years would be completely wasted. Ningbian? Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. He can't take down Ningbian. Even if it's Tunan City, he will completely spit it out for me. Li Huaqing was stunned and said slowly, What's your plan? Not yet. Li Tianlan said calmly, Wait until I get to Tiannan. Tiannan? You want to go to Tiannan? No. Li Huaqing was slightly surprised. Tianlan, don't be impulsive. In fact, Jianghu State has decided to secretly support the Freedom Corps. The parliament has decided to hold a meeting in 3 hours. You are the marshal of Jianghu State and now one of the strongest forces in Jianghu State. You come back to attend the meeting first. After we confirm the list of support for the Freedom Corps, you will lead the team. It's too slow. Li Tianlan said lightly, I can't wait that long. He said no more and hung up the communication directly. With a pinch of his hand, the tablet had become a pile of parts. In the distance, the roar of the helicopter's rotors sounded faintly. Li Tianlan threw the parts in his hand on the ground and looked back at Lonely Mountain. He really didn't expect such a thing to happen. When Li Honghe's funeral had just come to an end. If Grandpa knew this in the afterlife, he would be very disappointed with him in the face of such a thing, wouldn't he? Li Tianlan clenched his fists and looked at the helicopter that was slowly landing. He said lightly, Let's go back. Chapter 700. Flames burned the night sky. Dawn was coming. In the darkest night before dawn, the flames of war in Tunnan City had completely subsided. The chaos was still spreading, but the Burning Legion had officially entered Tunnan City and taken over the Order of Tunnan City. Ramiro quietly patrolled the city that had fallen into his hands. His whole body was almost integrated with the night sky. He silently moved forward, shuttling through the streets and alleys of the city like a ghost in the dark. Blood and corpses could be seen everywhere on the streets. The air was still filled with the smell of blood. This smell blended with the burning flames and stimulated people's sense of smell. It was war, death, and the smell of gunpowder. Ramiro's figure flickered and appeared at the top of a bell tower. This was the tallest enemy in Tunnan City. The nearly 120-meter tall bell tower was located in the center of the city, less than 200 meters away from the city hall. Standing on the bell tower, most of Tunnan City could be seen in the night sky. Most of the residents of Tunnan City remained silent in the dead silence. The streets, however, were extremely lively. The Burning Legion and the Annan rebel army walked in groups in the city. Countless people carried the corpses of the dead and piled them together. The fire of burning the corpses almost illuminated the entire city. Faint light filled the deep night, reflecting the large ruins destroyed by the battle. The entire Tunnan City had a touch of desolation and ferocity after the war. Ramiro silently watched, motionless. The strongest king in Africa today did not have a prominent background, nor did he have a heroic story. Like countless families destroyed by war, Ramiro came from an ordinary small country in Africa. His parents and family were killed in the war, leaving only him and his younger sister. The war destroyed all the order in the country. Faced with the absurd situation of having tens of millions of local currency but being unable to afford a meal, Ramiro traded all the resources of his family for an AK-49, the most classic assault rifle. That year Ramiro was 12 years old. He took his own weapon and joined the local rebel army. He didn't even know what he was fighting against. At that time his biggest wish was to live and be with his sister. If it could be worse. He just hoped that he and his sister could live a better life. From the domestic rebel army to private armed forces, small mercenary groups and large mercenary groups. Wandering from place to place. He had been fighting all his life. There was not much warmth or beauty. Blood and smoke filled his blood. He made progress again and again. His talent, which was not very outstanding, was brought into full play by him. Chi commanding, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking realm. To be invincible. Step by step, he finally became the guardian deity in the hearts of countless people in Africa. But Ramiro didn't think he was a god. He felt that he was a wise man. He had won countless brilliant victories along the way, but he was not blinded by any glory or temptation. Even though he was now an invincible realm expert, he still managed his Burning Legion with the most cautious attitude. Steady, low-key, and calm. This kind of burning core made almost everyone feel that the burning core was not a threat, and they felt that the burning core was very useful. Ramiro was definitely a smart man. He didn't have the pride and dignity of the so-called invincible realm experts. Compared with experts in the same realm, he was better at compromise, concession, and forbearance than anyone else. As a result, the scale of the Burning Legion grew larger and stronger, gradually becoming recognized as the #1 legion in Africa. At this time, Ramiro made another extremely correct decision. When the Burning Legion became the #1 legion in Africa, he gave up the title of the #1 expert in Africa. And he also gave it to a black man. The Burning Legion had been developing for many years, but it had only become recognized as the #1 legion in Africa in recent years. In recent years, there had been a second invincible realm expert in Africa besides Ramiro. The invincible realm expert was almost the complete opposite of Ramiro. Compared with Ramiro, who was calm and collected, the other party was arrogant and surly. He didn't restrain himself at all. As soon as he entered the invincible realm, he began to rob the interests of the major European consortiums. Compared with experts in the same realm, his extremely weak defense was exchanged for absolute powerful attack power. As soon as he appeared, Ramiro, who had watched his battle, personally admitted that he was not as good as the other party. As a result, some people in the Burning Legion left. But the people who stayed once again consolidated the defense power of the Burning Legion. Ramiro was still calm and collected. He coldly watched the invincible realm expert catch up from behind and become more and more popular. When the major consortiums in Africa suffered heavy losses, they had also hired the Burning Legion to deal with the other party, but Ramiro refused that employment. So the other party acted more unscrupulously, and finally, the title of the #1 expert in Africa was completely confirmed. During that time, the Burning Legion was almost completely forgotten. The whole of Africa seemed to only know Black Ghost. Yes, Black Ghost. Black Ghost made threatening gestures in Africa, and the Burning Legion operated in a low-key manner in Africa. Then the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out. The Burning Legion finally began to move after countless years of forbearance. Black Ghost, who had stolen the limelight, finally died in the hands of Li Tianlan in the chaos in Eastern Europe. After countless years of preparation, the Burning Legion marched into Tiannan and swept everything away. It seemed to have become the first superpower to rise in the new era. Ramiro looked into the distance. In the night, his eyes were still cautious, but he knew very well that from tonight on, the entire Tiannan would be under his control. He would control Tiannan and become the only master of this land of more than 30,000 square kilometers. Master. He liked this title very much. The cell phone rang for a moment on the silent bell tower. Ramiro took out his cell phone in silence. It was not a video call, not a phone call, just a very simple text message. The encrypted number showed a string of asterisks. There was no content in the text message, only a question mark. Ramiro's eyes narrowed, and he also did not answer any words. He just replied with a big exclamation mark. The other end of the phone was silent for a moment, and then replied again. This time it was an ellipsis. Ramiro smiled and replied with a full stop. All the information was transmitted in 4 punctuation marks. The other end of the phone stopped replying. Ramiro carefully deleted the text messages one by one, and his eyes were a little strange. That kind of eyes was not unwilling or angry or resentful, but a very clear kind of thinking, with a little hesitation and solemnity. In any case, the person behind the text message could be said to be the benefactor of the Burning Legion, and also Ramiro's benefactor. Ramiro did not deny that without the man behind him, he would not have reached the invincible realm, and the Burning Legion would not have been as big as it was today. For so many years, if it were not for the large amount of secret funding from the other party, he might still be wandering in the thundershocking realm today. The Burning Legion could at best be regarded as a large mercenary group, not a superpower at all. And it could be foreseen that as long as the person behind the scenes could still control the Burning Legion through Ramiro, the large amount of funding from the other party would not stop. However, Ramiro was thinking whether such funding was still needed for the Burning Legion. He had already occupied the Heavenly South. This land of more than 30,000 square kilometers was still very barren. However, to determine whether a region was prosperous or not, apart from some hardware facilities and geographical advantage, the most important factor was whether the region had enough order to attract people. From this point of view, the development potential of Tiannan was quite amazing. As long as he could completely control Tiannan, given time, it might become the second Wang family of Beihai in the Dark World. All the superpowers in the Dark World had their own foundation and territory. But in the vast Dark World, only the Wang family of Beihai really had an independent foundation. On the 160,000 square kilometers of land of Beihai, all the army recruitment came from the Order of Mount Dibing. All the appointment and dismissal of officials also came from the Order of Mount Dibing. All the rules of the game were made by the Wang family of Beihai. The star flag of Jianghu state fluttered in Beihai province, but the will of Mount Dibing was everything in Beihai, and it was really above Jianghu state. What Tiannan was pursuing at present was the future of Beihai. He controlled Tiannan and already had the capital to ignore the person behind the scenes. Ramiro did not want to betray. He had today's status because he never courted death. But with his current strength and foundation, he felt that he was already qualified to discuss with the other party a relatively freer mode of cooperation. Of course, the premise was to help the other party get through the near-fatal difficulties. This required more control of Tiannan. While pondering, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. The phone was connected almost immediately. The whistling sound of the rotors was faint. What was clearer was Minister Jin's complacent laughter. "Well done, Your Highness Ramiro. On behalf of Annan, I thank the Burning Legion for their contribution." "Minister Jin," Ramiro said calmly, "it's too early for you to be happy." "How come?" Minister Jin said with some surprise. "As far as I know, the Burning Legion and the rebel army have occupied Tunan City and 3 military bases around Tunan City. They have gained a lot of advanced armaments." Indeed. Ramiro said lightly, "but that's not enough. I need your army to gather again." The solemn night seemed to gradually disperse. Ramiro looked at the night sky in the distance and said lightly, "I want to take Ningbian before dark." Minister Jin was a little speechless for a moment. All this seemed to happen too fast. I need the help of Annan's state, the help of the real elite army. Ramiro said slowly, I am willing to abide by the final agreement. As long as you help me take down Tianan, the Burning Legion is also willing to protect Annan's state in the future. This was the final agreement between the Burning Legion and Annan's state. It was also the agreement that Annan's state had been seeking for several years. As long as they took down Tianan, Ramiro would be the war god of Annan's state from now on. In recent decades, Annan's state did not have its own invincible realm expert. Ramiro was undoubtedly the most worthy target for them. Minister Jean hesitated for a moment and then said in a deep voice, Yes, Your Highness. Wait for my news. Don't call me Your Highness. Ramiro said calmly, From now on, call me Dominator. Chapter 701. Tunin City Hall. In the conference room. When Ramelin walked in, the spacious conference room was already full of people. At this moment, most of the people sitting in the conference room were unfamiliar faces to Ramelin. They were all middle and high-level officers of the Burning Legion, the most important cornerstone of the Burning Legion. To some extent, these people were currently some capable deputy officers in the Burning Legion. After all, the Burning Legion was just a legion. To put it bluntly, it was a large mercenary corps. Its internal system was relatively simple, and its general development plan was also focused on combat. Ramelin had to make arrangements for the real experts of the Burning Legion. Almost all the high-level positions within the Burning Legion were held by experts of the Thundershocking realm. However, it was the middle and high-level officers who were really responsible for commanding the battle in front of him. This was also the reason why the Burning Legion's offensive was so strong tonight. Those experts could make the Burning Legion sharper, but without them, it would not affect the integrity of the Burning Legion. In such a development, the ones who felt the most aggrieved were the deputy officers sitting in the conference room in front of him. However, the situation had changed from today onwards. The Burning Legion, which occupied Tianan, now had the embryonic form of a superpower. In the following time, the Burning Legion would inevitably be reorganized internally, turning from a legion into a superpower that truly spanned all fields. This meant countless opportunities. Everyone present had enough opportunities to take charge of the Burning Legion's territory in the future. Ramelin sent most of the experts out and left these people behind. It was not necessarily without the intention of getting in touch with them and understanding each other. Annan's defense minister, Jean Yongqing, was also sitting in the conference room. Seeing Ramelin come in, everyone got up at the same time. Your Highness Lord. Lord. This was the code name Ramelin gave himself. It was not a new code name. When the Burning Legion was called the First Legion in Africa, Ramelin himself did not have a code name. This alone showed that he was low-key. Sit down. Ramelin waved his hand, walked to the main seat and sat down. Without any polite greetings, he said straightforwardly, Report the battle damage. Your Highness, a total of 8,600 people participated in this operation tonight, divided into two batches. The first batch consisted of 5,000 people, and the second batch consisted of 3,600 people. The battle radius was 65 kilometers, and the duration was 4 hours and 35 minutes. According to the current statistics, 4,100 people of the Burning Legion were sacrificed, about 600 were seriously injured, and 1,500 were lightly injured. There are still about 3,000 soldiers who can continue to fight, including some who are lightly injured. This may have some impact on their combat effectiveness. In the conference room, a mixed-race middle-aged man stood up and reported in a steady voice, In about 5 hours we can increase the number of combatants in Tunin City to about 9,000. The loss rate of this war is 8% lower than we expected. This is in line with expectations. This is a success. Ramelin's face was expressionless, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Even though he knew that they wouldn't be able to win easily against the Freedom Legion, such losses still made his heart ache. Even though it was in line with his expectations, it was only rational data obtained after combining a large amount of data and analysis. In his heart, the best course of action in his mind would be to reduce the loss rate by about 30%. After all, the Burning Legion who followed him into Tianan were all elites. If they could lose less, it would mean that the Burning Legion's combat effectiveness would be stronger. Ramelin snorted and said in a deep voice, "What about the harvest?" "We are still counting." Another black man stood up. At present, the Legion has successfully controlled 3 military bases. For the time being, we have not found any cutting-edge special weapons. However, the Freedom Corps' conventional equipment is also at least 2 grades higher than the Burning Legion's. This is the key to improving our combat effectiveness. The only pity is that they do not have fighter jets. Your Highness, perhaps we should really consider building a military airport in Tiannan. Ramelin shook his head and did not say anything, but his eyes were thoughtful. The Freedom Corps did not have fighter jets. In other words, all the major forces in Tiannan had no fighter jets. After Tiannan broke away from Annan, the airport and the railway were all destroyed. Under such circumstances, air supremacy had always been an extremely sensitive issue. Jianghu State could not intervene for the time being, while Annan State was full of scruples. The game between the two sides had lasted for several years, so that neither the Freedom Corps nor the rebel army had their own air power. At most, they had a few armed helicopters. Minister Jean, how many people are left in the rebel army? Ramelin suddenly asked after a moment of silence. Minister Jean was stunned and a little embarrassed. We are still counting. He said this with difficulty. In fact, Annan State and the rebel army were still in the carnival of taking Tunnan City. Counting the battle losses? At present, no one seemed to care about this. As for the Burning Legion, no one thought of the so-called carnival. After the battle, the first thing to do was to count the battle losses and harvest and make the next plan. Rigorous, efficient, and precise. The gap between the Burning Legion and the rebel army was infinitely large at this moment. Ramelin did not say much. He just looked at Minister Jean and said calmly, 30,000 people in 5 hours. Is there any problem? 5 hours. 5 hours later, the second batch of about 9,000 troops of the Burning Legion would arrive in Tunnan City. At that time, Ramelin would have more than 10,000 troops under his command. In addition to the 30,000 troops of the rebel army, Ramelin could use nearly 50,000 people. This was the power he was going to use to take Ningbian in one go. Minister Jean hesitated and finally couldn't help but say, Your Highness, isn't it a little too hasty? Ramelin glanced at him and raised his eyebrows. What do you want to say? I think we need some time to prepare. Annan State will prepare a real elite force for Your Highness, equipped with the best equipment and experts in Annan State. I think only a war with full preparation can we win. Minister Jean said helplessly. Ramelin narrowed his eyes, looked at the officers sitting in the conference room and suddenly said, What do you think? Time is not necessarily on our side. A white woman who was rare in the Burning Legion stood up. You know, this time we are facing Jianghu State, the most powerful country in the world. In terms of the quality of the army, the advanced level of armaments, and the camp of experts, we have no advantage and Annan State has no advantage. Our only advantage now is the cohesion and mobility of the Burning Legion. In other words, we are prepared for this war in advance. And Jianghu State, because of scruples about the influence of public opinion, is unlikely to openly send troops to occupy Tiannan. If this is not true, I think we don't have to fight the war. Because as long as Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Jianghu State, appears in Tiannan State, we can't even stop the Blood Battalion of Jianghu State. On the land, we can't even stop the Blood Battalion of Jianghu State. There was silence. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Jianghu State. Purely in terms of personal strength, Dongqing Wudi was not too scary. But a Dongqing Wudi who led an army was enough to make anyone's scalp numb. And a legion commanded by Dongqing Wudi was also enough to make people tremble. He had been operating in the Border Control Corps for too many years. With or without him, the soldiers of the Border Control Corps were completely different in terms of momentum and mental state. If Jianghu State really attacked blatantly, Dongqing Wudi personally took command. The Burning Legion had no confidence to stop Dongqing Wudi at all. It's impossible. Minister Jean said immediately, Tiannan is not the territory of Jianghu State. Jianghu State has stated that it has no territorial ambitions for Tiannan. Although we all know that it's impossible, there will certainly not be an army flying the flag of Jianghu State in this war. He paused, gritted his teeth and continued, The President is communicating with the heads of state of Star State and various European countries. They will put pressure on Jianghu State internationally, just like in the past few years. What I can guarantee is that the army of Jianghu State will not enter Tiannan on a large scale. But this is the only thing I can guarantee. So time is not on our side. The white woman nodded. As long as Ningbian is still there, Jianghu State is equal to Tiannan and still has power. With a complete military base, it means that as long as there is time, they can secretly prepare a large number of troops and experts to enter the Freedom Corps. Then they will fight back and take down Tunnan City. I think Jianghu State has already begun to plan this. Ningbian has the entire Zhongzhou state as its backing. The longer it takes, the more difficult the situation we face will be. So I agree with your Highness's suggestion to take down Ningbian as soon as possible. It's not easy to take down Ningbian now. Minister Jin couldn't help saying, according to the news we got, Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps, has returned to Tiannan with the senior members of the Freedom Corps. Ning Ziyuan was also a famous general of Zhongzhou state before. He's not easy to deal with. What we are facing now is a Freedom Corps that has just lost a battle without a complete command. This is the time when their momentum is at its peak because they are angry and unconvinced. If we rush up at this time we will lose a lot and we may not win. As the Minister of Defense of Annan, he was naturally not a brainless fool. Now that he had calmed down, his mind became clearer. Also, I think you should not forget that His Highness Ramelin is not absolutely invincible. In fact, the Burning Legion has provoked a strong enemy tonight. Emperor Dong's palace may still be weak and just starting out. But now in the whole dark world, who dares to say that their palace master, Li Tianlan, is weak? He is the future heavenly sun. He has just swept Beihai province and forced the Wang family of Beihai to bow down. He is also at his peak. Many people say that although he has not entered the invincible realm in today's dark world, he can almost be said to be invincible. I don't think I need to say more about Li Tianlan's character. We destroyed the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. With Li Tianlan's character, I don't believe he will bear it. At this time maybe he has already reached Ningbian. If the Burning Legion rushes over, it will not only be the Freedom Corps, but also the top combat force of Emperor Dong's palace. That is also the top combat force in today's dark world. Humph. Ramelin suddenly snorted heavily, and a fierce killing intent flashed through his eyes. Seeming to realize that his mood was a little wrong, he took a deep breath, calmed himself down and said faintly, Emperor Dong's palace is not as terrible as you say. Li Tianlan is the future heavenly sun, and the future heavenly sun also means that he is nothing now. Minister Jin looked at Ramelin's calm face, stunned. Not only him but everyone in the whole conference room was silent for a moment. Li Tianlan was nothing now? Perhaps before the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out, some people would dare to say so. But now, even the diehard supporters of the Burning Legion felt that Ramelin was not qualified to say such a thing. Ramelin remained calm and continued, Li Tianlan is really strong in his normal state. Although he has not entered the invincible realm, I will not underestimate him because of that. But now, he smiled and said, I have enough information to prove that Li Tianlan has suffered serious internal injuries in the trip to Beihai, and now he is not in his peak state. As for Saint, he also has internal injuries and our people raided the hospital, which is also a top priority. Even if they want to retaliate, only one of them can come, Li Tianlan or Saint. The most important thing is even if they come, they won't come so fast. Everyone, you all know what the future heavenly sun means. Zhongzhou state will know better than you. After the Sword Emperor is silent, Zhongzhou state will definitely strengthen the protection of Li Tianlan and support Emperor Dong's palace to establish a foothold in Tiannan. But it will take time. If there is no accident, Li Tianlan will gather the masters of Zhongzhou state as soon as possible and unite with the Freedom Corps to carry out the first counterattack against us, which is also the most dangerous counterattack. Minister Jin, believe me, it won't take too long. They will make their move in at most 3 days. Therefore these 3 days are the most crucial time for us. I must take down Yongbien today, and then use the next 2 days to set up Yongbien. I'm talking about taking Ningbian before dark. You promised. Bang! A sturdy black man stood up, slapped the table and sneered in a low voice. As long as we take Ningbian, we will drive the forces of Zhongzhou state out of Tiannan. In this case, it will be difficult for Zhongzhou state, which has no power in Tiannan, to reach in. After all, although the Freedom Corps is now the army of Zhongzhou state, it is nominally the rebel army of Annan state. We will wipe out the rebel army, occupy the right and drive Zhongzhou state out. What else can they do? He stared at Minister Jin and said in a rude tone, the Burning Corps is helping Annan state. What are you hesitating for? There is also the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Ramiro's voice was indifferent. The Purgatory of Heaven capital also belongs to the Li family, and it is the force of Li Guangtu. But at present, Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan don't seem to be on the same side. But after losing Tiannan, the possibility of their temporary cooperation is not ruled out. Zhongzhou state will not be willing to give up Tiannan. If we beat back the Freedom Corps, Zhongzhou state and East Emperor Palace are likely to make a comeback with the help of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan. This is all Annan's trouble. A grumpy black man said discontentedly. Minister Jean was furious and extremely embarrassed. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was also invited by Annan at that time. At that time the Freedom Corps was dominated by the Wang family of Beihai. The Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Wang family of Beihai were tit for tat. Based on the principle that the enemy was a friend, Annan invited the Purgatory of Heaven capital to enter Tiannan. But now it seemed that this was undoubtedly inviting a wolf into the house. So after dealing with the Freedom Corps, we have to select a small number of elites to destroy the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan. The only thing to be thankful for is that the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan is not much. It is probably weaker than the power of Emperor East's palace. This way we can dispatch fewer elites and improve our mobility. Ramon stood up. Everyone, I know it's not easy, but this is a crucial battle for the rise of the Burning Legion. As long as we clear Jianghu State in heaven, as long as we clear all the forces in Tiannan, it is impossible for Jianghu State to extend its tentacles into Tiannan for a while under the pressure of public opinion. They will slowly develop, slowly plot, and slowly accumulate strength. This will take a lot of time. And during this time, it is the best opportunity for the Burning Corps to slowly develop. He glanced at Minister Jean and no longer had any scruples. He said straightforwardly, Annan invited us to Tiannan and invited the Burning Corps to become the special warfare center of Annan. It is not to give us power and wealth but also to contribute. That is, to directly face the risk of Jianghu State in Tiannan. At this time, we will have to face their endless counterattacks in the future if we leave any way out for Jianghu State. So, we will have enough time to accumulate strength if we drive them out. He clenched his fists hard and said coldly, codename Tusk. All members of the Burning Corps will be dispatched. Attack Ningbian first and destroy the Purgatory of Heaven capital in a battle area of 300 kilometers. I want to get good news before dark. The sooner the better. Boom. The entire conference room suddenly boiled for a moment. The officers of the Burning Corps sitting in the conference room suddenly got up and began to issue orders. Ramiro turned to look at Minister Jean with a heavy look in his eyes. Annan will fully cooperate. Minister Jean took a deep breath and said directly without hesitation. I know what you are worried about. Ramiro said lightly. In the text message prompt, he took out his mobile phone and glanced at it. There were only 2 short sentences. Radel and his team have entered the hidden state. Li Tianlan didn't appear in the Freedom Corps. A smile appeared on the corner of Ramiro's mouth. Li Tianlan didn't come to Tiannan. This is the news I received. Even if he comes, I will stop him. Don't worry. Your Highness, do you think you can win against Li Tianlan? Minister Jean asked. He didn't have much confidence in what he said. Li Tianlan might not be the strongest now, but his momentum was so strong that everyone would feel a great pressure when they thought of it. This was just like Wang Tianzong who broke through to the invincible realm. At that time he might not be the strongest, but his momentum was soaring, sharp, and insufferably arrogant. As time went by, this impression became more and more stable, and he naturally became the top expert on the divine list. I'm not sure. Ramiro said calmly. His eyes flickered a little. Obviously he thought of Li Tianlan's achievements. He seriously injured Gu Qianchuan, killed Jiang Chenyan, killed Black Ghost, seriously injured King Tong, killed DK, and defeated Dijiang. These were all things that Li Tianlan had done in a normal state. At his age and before entering the invincible realm, such achievements were simply brilliant. Ramiro took a deep breath and continued, but I can at least be sure that I won't lose. Linton. On Lonely Mountain with Li Tianlan's departure, everyone had dispersed. Without light, the mountain became colder than ever. The old people of the Li family had followed Li Tianlan to Tiannan. Qin Weibai and Saint also rushed back to Yuzhou. On the vast Lonely Mountain, only Li Kuangtu, Phoenix, and Daybreak were left in the base camp of the Li family. The rain in Lin and had stopped. The glimmer of dawn gradually covered the earth. At the moment when light and darkness alternated, the sound of the wheelchair passing through the cemetery became the only sound in the mountain. Phoenix and Daybreak stood at the entrance of the cemetery, motionless. Li Kuangtu was surrounded by subtle sword energy. The sword energy pushed the wheelchair down the slope of the cemetery slowly. Li Kuangtu looked at the cemetery in front of him, expressionless. After everyone left, Li Kuangtu, who did not attend the funeral and did not show up, finally entered the cemetery alone. Without Phoenix and Daybreak following him, he pushed the wheelchair alone to Li Honghe's new grave in the cemetery and stayed there for more than 2 hours. No one knew what he said to his dead father. No one even knew if he had spoken in the past 2 hours or not. Li Guangtu's mood was very stable from beginning to end, so stable that it was almost emotionless. What time is it? Coming to daybreak, Phoenix had taken the initiative to stand behind Li Guangtu and hold the wheelchair. Daybreak looked down at his watch and said, 5:20. Li Guangtu thought for a while and said lightly, if there is no accident, Li Tianlan should arrive in Tianan soon. This was not a question that Li Guangtu should care about, but it suddenly had a different meaning when he said it at this time. Daybreak raised his eyebrows slightly and asked directly, do you want me to do something with our power? I'm not interested in Li Tianlan's revenge, but in any case, Chess Emperor can't die in vain. Li Guangtu said lightly. One could imagine how close his first guard was to him in those days, but now he died in the Burning Legion's surprise attack. There must be an explanation for this matter. It was just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time, Li Guangtu murmured to himself and said calmly, we can pay attention to Li Tianlan's actions in Tianan. If the Burning Legion takes Ningbian, the next target must be us. This is an important bargaining chip for our cooperation with Jianghu State. If Li Tianlan can stop the Burning Legion, we can cooperate with him. I'll find someone to talk to him. Daybreak said. Oh. Li Guangtu shook his head and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. You go and talk to him yourself. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was the power left by the Li family in the old era. For many years, they had secretly joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the name of faking their deaths under the benefit of Li Honghe. These people constituted the main body and the most powerful cutting-edge power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Among these people, Li Tianlan was very familiar with most of them. Even if he was not familiar with them, he was familiar with them. If he found someone to talk to, maybe the people of the Purgatory of Heaven capital had already become the people of Emperor Dong's palace. He had to send someone who could be absolutely trusted and could control the situation to talk to Li Tianlan, so as to avoid variables to the greatest extent. Daybreak was the most suitable candidate. But the problem was that the most suitable candidate obviously couldn't stay in Tianan in the future. Li Guangtu had a headache. He thought about it and continued, it's just a temporary cooperation. Remember, our most important task is not to kill the enemy but to protect ourselves. Daybreak nodded, turned around and left without hesitation. Li Guangtu looked at his back and didn't speak for a long time. He finally began to face the future situation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the problems it might face. When his identity was exposed, he was seriously injured, he was not trusted by East Island, and he didn't dare to trust Jianghu State. Self-protection became the most important problem for him. Li Tianlan could indeed protect the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But it was a pity that this was not Li Guangtu's choice. In the cold breeze of the morning, Li Guangtu was silent for a long time, and then said lightly, contact summer solstice for me. Chapter 702. The sound of rotor rotation tore up the night wind, whistling through the boundless mountains, all the way south, flying farther and farther. The helicopter was getting closer and closer to the target site. It was still dark outside the window. The ink-like night dyed the world. At the darkest moment before dawn, only the helicopter's signal light was flashing in the air. In the somewhat crowded cabin, Li Tianlan slowly opened his eyes. The faint sound of a call rang in his ears. Attention Freedom Corps, this is Tsangkong 2, His Highness Li Tianlan's plane. We will pass over the 4th base of the Freedom Corps in 10 minutes. I repeat, this is His Highness Li Tianlan's plane. We will pass over the 4th base of the Freedom Corps in 10 minutes. Freedom Corps, please? In the clear and calm repetition, Li Tianlan shook his head and gradually became sober. Li Tianlan moved his body. Before he spoke, Li Baitian's voice sounded, you're awake? Yes. Li Tianlan answered and asked casually, not asleep. How could I fall asleep? Li Baitian smiled bitterly. Compared with Li Tianlan's calmness, Li Baitian was completely in a state of rage. The headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace was destroyed, and the combatants suffered heavy casualties. His heart was bleeding at the thought of it. The plane flew all the way and every second of the whole process was torture for him. The others were obviously not sleepy. Hearing Li Tianlan's words, they all opened their eyes. We just flew over the border of Jianghu State. Ahead of us is Ningbian. After Ningbian, less than 70 kilometers, we will arrive at Tunan. Li Baitian said slowly, his eyes shining with blood. Have our people gathered? Li Tianlan asked. About 200 people have gathered. Some are still uncontactable, and some can't get to the gathering place for the time being. If all the combat forces are gathered, it will probably take a few hours. Li Baitian said. He was talking about the strength of the headquarters of East Emperor Palace. Thousands of combat forces in the headquarters of East Emperor Palace were directly scattered by the Burning Legion. In a few hours they left the headquarters, retreated, and gathered people. The casualties had not been counted yet. When Li Tianlan boarded the plane in Lin, he had asked Li Baidian to inform Du Hanin and ask her to gather the scattered people as soon as possible. Du Hanin was seriously injured, so she could only hand over the task to her assistant, which further reduced the efficiency. So far, there were less than 200 people gathered in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan nodded and looked at the crowd in the cabin. The elders of the Li family. The core of Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Yuxian. Everyone could be said to be the core of his team. It had nothing to do with Jianghu State or even Samsara Palace. After a moment of silence, he took out a tablet and opened the military map of Tunan City. A clear three-dimensional map showed everything around Tunan City on the screen. Li Tianlan looked at it for a while and pointed to a spot on the screen. "Probably here," he said softly. This location was about 6 kilometers away from the Freedom Legion's base number 1. It was beyond the Burning Legion's warning line and was temporarily considered a safe area. And this was where Li Tianlan had ordered the members of Emperor Dong's palace to gather. "Ninth uncle!" Li Tianlan suddenly shouted. "Young master!" In the cabin, an old man with dark skin and a face full of vicissitudes stood up. There were not many elders left in the Li family, but at this time, they all faintly regarded this old man as their leader. This was status and strength. Whether in the era of Li Honghe or in the short era of Li Guangtu, Ninth Uncle was the backbone of the Li family. His code name was Eagle King. He used to be a figure standing in the high-rise buildings of the Dark World. Among the older generation of the Li family, Eagle King could be said to be one of the strongest people in comprehensive ability. At his peak, he was also a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Now Eagle King was nearly 60 years old and his state had begun to decline, but he still maintained the realm of the half-step invincible realm. He and Qingye, who was seriously injured and was still recuperating in Yuzhou, could be said to be the only two experts of the half-step invincible realm who belonged to the Li family. "Bring Qianqing here and meet up with our people," Li Tianlan whispered. "Okay." Eagle King looked at the map carefully and nodded. "In this position, I probably need to go down now to meet them as soon as possible." Li Tianlan nodded. "Ninth uncle, thank you. Qianqing, you go with Ninth uncle." No matter how experienced Eagle King was, he was not familiar with the people of the East Emperor Palace. With Ning Qianqing with him, there would be no problem in commanding and dispatching. Ning Qianqing nodded and stood up. The helicopter lowered its altitude slightly. The hatch opened. In the roaring wind, Eagle King grabbed Ning Qianqing and jumped down with flashing lightning all over the sky. "Is that okay, uncle?" Li Baidian was a little hesitant. At first, he thought that Li Tianlan wanted him to lead the elites of Emperor Dong's palace. Ninth uncle was the commander of the Heavenly Eagle Troop before he went to the border with Grandpa. Li Tianlan said softly. "The Heavenly Eagle Troop?" Li Baidian was a little confused. He had never heard of such a troop in Jianghu State. It didn't belong to the Border Control Corps or any major theater of operations. The Heavenly Eagle Troop used to be a special troop under the dual leadership of Zhuanyuantai and the military headquarters of Jianghu State. Its combat field covered the whole world. The commander was directly appointed by the god of war of Jianghu State and had the rank of lieutenant general. After the treason case, the designation of the Heavenly Eagle Troop was cancelled. But in fact it was reorganized. Some of the elites entered the Border Control Corps, and the remaining part changed its name, which is today's Shadow Sting Troop. "Boy, why are you looking at me like that? Aren't we old guys as good as you?" Yu Donglai, the oldest in the cabin, said grumpily. Li Baitian's hand shook and he smiled bitterly without saying anything. The predecessor of the Shadow Sting Troop. The Shadow Sting Force was now the largest special force in Jianghu State, and its predecessor, the Heavenly Eagle Force, seemed to be even stronger than the Shadow Sting Force. Although it had been many years since he was the commander of the Heavenly Eagle Force, he shouldn't be questioned. He glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was still calm. But it was not until this moment that Li Baidian really realized something. Even though the Li family had fallen, it didn't dissipate after all. Eagle King was just a microcosm of the Li family in the past. This made Li Baidian see more clearly what the Li family was. The Li family had indeed fallen because of the treason case. But this kind of fall wasn't a dying struggle but a choice and compromise. Not only Li Baidian, but many people who hadn't experienced everything back then would feel very strange. The treason case led to the total annihilation of the army deployed by Jianghu state on the border, which was indeed very serious. But at that time the patriarch of the Li family was not Li Guangtu, but Li Honghe. What was Li Honghe's status in Jianghu state? Not to mention that year, even if he had disappeared from the stage of Jianghu state for more than 20 years, his death still caused an unprecedented shock in Jianghu state. All the directors and members of the Jianghu state parliament were present, including the military and the special warfare system. And Li Honghe, who was still at his peak, had an even more terrifying influence. In other words, as long as he was willing to give up something, the Li family might still survive in the Li family. Maybe Kunlun City would replace Swangyuantai. But at that time, the Li family would still be one of the wealthy families in Jianghu state. But Li Honghe didn't do that. He didn't give up something. He gave up everything. Yes, he even took away all the people who were loyal to the Li family. He gave up the so-called power and wealth, but he took away the most powerful and core force of the Li family and didn't let them disperse. If Li Honghe had chosen to persist, then the people and forces he had taken away would have been destined to be the objects he had abandoned. What he could have kept was his greatly reduced status, power and wealth, but he would have lost the people's support. So Li Honghe gave up what he should give up, kept what he couldn't give up, and went to the remote border. For more than 20 years, the cohesion of the Li family had not dispersed, but became the purgatory of heaven capital. Until today. With the death of Li Honghe and the exposure of Li Guangtu's identity, Jianghu state and Li Guangtu had a bridge of cooperation again. Jianghu state already had a neutral attitude to investigate the treason case. In this way, Li Guangtu was no longer a traitor but a suspect. As for the old members of the Li family, they were no longer accomplices and implicated. They might not be so innocent, but at least with the death of Li Honghe and the rise of Li Tianlan, they were no longer the focus of surveillance. The power that the Li family had suppressed for more than 20 years could finally reappear in Jianghu state. For example, the current Eagle King. This was just the beginning. Li Baidian thought of the purgatory of heaven capital. The purgatory of heaven capital was destined to have Li Guangtu's loyal followers, but there were also many people who faked their deaths to avoid the surveillance of Jianghu state and still contributed to the Li family. Before Li Honghe died, he handed the Li family to Li Tianlan. These people naturally recognized Li Tianlan more than Li Guangtu. What did this mean? It meant that as the situation gradually became clear, a considerable part of the purgatory of heaven capital would gradually join Emperor Dong's palace. They were all experts of the last era and people who once occupied special positions in Jianghu state. That was the main structure of the Li family. With the development of Emperor Dong's palace, this huge structure would also radiate new vitality inside Emperor Dong's palace. For the first time, Li Baidian felt awe. Power, status, wealth, and strength. Most of the time, it was an inseparable whole. But in a huge accident, when the Li family had to make a choice, Li Honghe did not hesitate to choose to preserve his strength. He gave up all the power, status, and wealth and took great risks to lie dormant. He made great achievements and finally received the report. He broke the cocoon and turned into a butterfly. At this moment, the Li family, after years of Li Honghe's forbearance, stood up again in Li Tianlan's hands. It was like a nirvana. Rebirth from the fire. And all this came from Li Honghe's sobriety and reason in those years. Li Baidian took a deep breath and looked in the direction of Tunnan City, with flames burning in his eyes. He could totally see how glorious Emperor Dong's palace would be after this matter was solved. They would welcome an impact that was extremely beneficial to them. The old people of the Li family and even the purgatory of heaven capital entering Emperor Dong's palace would impact the current situation of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Baidian was very clear that as the person who first followed Li Tianlan, he had to use his sword to find his position in Emperor Dong's palace in the future. Baidian. Li Tianlan's voice pulled Li Baidian's thoughts back. Yes. Li Baidian responded. You Senior Yu Qingyan? Li Tianlan hesitated and looked at the remaining old people of the Li family. Let's go. Two of them stood up, a man and a woman. They were the few couples among the old people of the Li family. Their strength was not strong and their talent was not outstanding. The man barely entered the thunder-shocking realm, and the woman was still at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. But there were not many masters in the Burning Legion except for Ramelin. Li Tianlan nodded and said, You go to the number 2 base. He glanced at Lin Yuxian and said slowly, You go with Baidian. Apart from friendship, Li Baidian was the only one in the core team of Emperor Dong's palace who was very likely to break through and enter the invincible realm. Ning Chenxing was also very good, but if there was no accident, it was difficult for him to cross the chasm from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the invincible realm. Yu Qingyan and Du Hanyin were the same. In the future, they were not mainly responsible for fighting in Emperor Dong's palace. In terms of fighting, Li Beidian was most likely to become Li Tianlan's right-hand man. Mount Shu's Great Void Sword could be regarded as a standard late stage in martial arts. Now Li Beidian was in the thunder-shocking realm. Although he was good, he did not seem to be absolutely strong. Once he entered the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, his combat capability would usher in a real outbreak, and the higher he went, the stronger he would be. Among the 4 famous swords of Mount Shu, the sword intent of Great Void Sword was even above that of Nirvana Sword. Lin Yuxian was destined not to work for Li Tianlan in the future, but Li Tianlan hoped that Lin Yuxian could establish a good relationship with Li Beidian during his time in Emperor Dong's palace. Okay. Lin Yuxian did not hesitate and nodded with a smile. Li Tianlan's eyes finally fell on several elders of the Li family. 8 people. 1 at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, 3 at the thunder-shocking realm, and 4 at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said softly, "You go to the 3rd base." The 3 military bases in Tunan City were arranged in a triangle, and the first base had the best geographical location. After being occupied by the Burning Legion, as long as the Burning Legion still had ambition, they would definitely place a large number of soldiers in the first base. Therefore, Li Tianlan also invested the most people in the first base. Eagle King Ning Qianqing, Emperor Dong's palace, and the combined forces were all sent there. The second base was located on the side of Tunan City, and the surrounding environment was dangerous. This position was not good for attack, but it was the best position for defense. According to the intelligence of the Freedom Corps, the second base had the most heavy firepower and relatively few combatants. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, and Yu Donglai could be said to be the strongest destructive force available to Li Tianlan now. It was most suitable for them to go to the second base. The definition of the third base was logistics, and its strength was relatively weak. It should not be a problem for the 8 elders of the Li family to attack the third base. Of course, this was the arrangement of the Freedom Corps in the 3 bases, not the Burning Legion. But the Burning Legion had just taken Tunan City, and it was impossible for them to make too much change. Remember, your main purpose is to contain them. It's best if you can take down the 3 bases. If you can't, don't force them. Just contain them in the bases. Li Tianlan said quietly, as long as the 3 bases can't be free, my pressure will be much less. Lin Yuxian nodded and suddenly felt something wrong. He glanced at the people in the cabin again and suddenly said, "Who will go to Tunan City with you?" "Sure enough," Li Tianlan said calmly, "I'll go by myself." "Are you crazy?" Lin Yuxian and Li Beidian shouted at the same time. The main force of Tunan City was the 3 defense bases, but it did not mean that Tunan City had no defense force, especially when the Burning Legion entered Tunan City. Many important figures of the Burning Legion, powerful elites, and even Ramelun were in Tunan City. Under such circumstances, the defense force of Tunan City was much stronger than that of any base. Not to mention those elite soldiers and senior officers, Li Tianlan could not even get through Ramelun. "Since I dare to go, I'm not courting death." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "What other bargaining chips do you have? You're alone." Li Baitian's tone was a little excited. "I'm really alone." Li Tianlan nodded and said, "But I have a sword." His fingers moved slightly. The black and exquisite Shenyuan sword appeared in his hand and slowly rotated around his palm. "I'll take it." Li Tianlan said softly, "That's enough." He looked at Lin Yuxian and said blandly, "As long as you can contain the forces of the 3 bases, Ramelun is no match for us. 1 man, 1 sword." Wait. Lin Yuxian hesitated. "There's no time." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Let's go." Li Beidian suddenly gritted his teeth. Everyone got up at the same time and jumped out of the cabin. The cabin suddenly became spacious and empty. Li Tianlan sat quietly by himself. The outline of Tunan City gradually appeared in front of him. The night was still dark. A communication request suddenly lit up. Li Tianlan connected the video call. The figure of Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps, appeared in front of Li Tianlan. "Your Highness, have you arrived in Tiannan?" Ning Ziyuan asked directly. "Yes, Uncle Ning, how are things going on your side?" Li Tianlan's voice was very polite. He was not only Ning Qianqing's father but also one of the backbone forces of the Li family today. Otherwise, he would not have been directly transferred from the Eastern Theater of Operations to Tiannan. To some extent, it was equivalent to being exiled in disguise. Not very good, but I can still spare some men. I'm communicating with Wudi. Oh, and Thunder God. Ning Ziyuan said quickly, the Blood Battalion will provide some elites, plus a part of the Thunderbolt Battalion of the Freedom Corps. Your Highness, we don't have to rush to counterattack. The Freedom Corps will act with you. No need. Li Tianlan chuckled softly, this is a war that belongs to Emperor Dong's palace. He paused and continued, I insist. Ning Ziyuan looked at him in astonishment and asked incomprehensibly, why? Because the Freedom Corps is the Freedom Corps, and Emperor Dong's palace is Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan said seriously, Uncle Ning, we are on the same side. But the Freedom Corps and Emperor Dong's palace can only be regarded as allies. You mean? Ning Ziyuan was thoughtful. Judging from the development trend of Tiannan, Uncle Ning, what position do you think the Freedom Corps will play in Tiannan in the future? In the future? There will be no Freedom Corps in the future. Ning Ziyuan smiled bitterly. Li Tianlan did not speak. Ning Ziyuan was right. There would be no Freedom Corps in Tiannan in the future, and there would be no place for them in Tiannan at all. The reason? The reason was very simple. Because they were still nominally the rebel army of Annan, which was unjustifiable. Moreover, Annan could not let the Freedom Corps continue to exist. This was the truth that the whole Jianghu state understood. Therefore, when Li Tianlan chose to put Emperor Dong's palace in Tiannan, Jianghu state quickly accepted it. Annan state would not accept an army of Jianghu state dominating Tiannan in the name of its own country's rebel army. They would destroy the Freedom Corps at all costs. But as time went by, because of the Freedom Corps, Tiannan no longer belonged to Annan. This was also a fact. Emperor Dong's palace was now the link between Jianghu state and the Freedom Corps. In this respect, it was equivalent to Jianghu state supporting Emperor Dong's palace, and Emperor Dong's palace supporting the Freedom Corps. In this way, Jianghu state and the Freedom Corps had no inevitable connection. The plan with strength as the foundation was always simple but powerless. Next, Emperor Dong's palace would support the Freedom Corps to completely occupy Tiannan. Then Emperor Dong's palace would conquer the Freedom Corps. In this way, the Freedom Corps was gone, but the land was naturally occupied by Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace took Tiannan as its spoils of war and helped Annan state eliminate some rebels. As for Tiannan that had been occupied, Annan state wanted to take it back? Haha, what the hell were you thinking? This was the territory that Emperor Dong's palace took from the rebels. Why should it be returned to you? If you were not convinced, Annan state could turn to the Freedom Corps. But the Freedom Corps no longer existed. At that time, Annan state was bound to negotiate with Emperor Dong's palace. But Emperor Dong's palace, backed by Jianghu state, could talk nonsense with Annan state about this matter. When this matter was delayed for a long time, Emperor Dong's palace could declare Tiannan independent or turn to Jianghu state. Jianghu state could only accept it. At that time, even if Annan state wanted to find fault, it could not find Jianghu state. They could only find Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan would ask them to find the Freedom Corps. Find it at will. If things were delayed for a long time, Tiannan was destined to become a part of Jianghu state. Yes. Li Tianlan said softly, there will be no Freedom Corps in the future. Uncle, we are on the same side. I have something to say. I insist that Emperor Dong's palace fight this time with its own strength because I want to receive something in advance. Ning Ziyuan suddenly understood what Li Tianlan meant. He was stunned for a while before he suddenly said, Good boy, I understand. You are eyeing the armaments of the Freedom Corps? At this moment he did not even call Li Tianlan Your Highness. To be exact, the armaments of the Burning Corps. Tunan City had fallen. The 3 military bases were occupied by the Burning Corps. All the weapons and equipment there naturally belonged to the Burning Corps. If Emperor Dong's palace joined hands with the Freedom Corps, in the eyes of Jianghu state, it was equal to recovering the lost land. But if Emperor Dong's palace took the initiative to attack, then everything they conquered was equal to the spoils of Emperor Dong's palace. The Freedom Corps had nearly 50,000 people, and the 3 military bases in Tunan City could accommodate nearly 20,000 people. That was a batch of military equipment that could instantly arm a reinforced division. And they were all top-notch goods. As long as Emperor Dong's palace took this batch of armaments, their new city plan could be restarted. And at this stage, their re-established headquarters would also become impregnable because of this batch of armaments. Military equipment that was enough to arm 20,000 people. If Emperor Dong's palace wanted to apply to Jianghu state for such large-scale materials, it would be wishful thinking. The academics was bound to be in a difficult position, and the Prince Group, Special Warfare Group and Southeast Group would all oppose it. Jianghu State funded the Freedom Corps to conquer Tian'an. This was the overall situation and no one opposed it. After all, there were still many variables in the future of Emperor Dong's palace. But supporting Emperor Dong's palace would make Li Tianlan's power soar, and there would be more people who opposed it. Now, Emperor Dong's palace took the spoils of war by itself. Did the Prince Group and Special Warfare Group want to take them back? That was even more wishful thinking. At least the giant group and the academics would not agree. This was the reason why Li Tianlan insisted that Emperor Dong's palace take the initiative to attack. He did not need any allies in this battle. This batch of armaments that could arm 20,000 people would become the spoils of Emperor Dong's palace. This would also be the battle where Emperor Dong's palace officially established itself in Tian'an, and even completely established its position. With this batch of armaments I can do a lot of things. Li Tianlan suddenly said, "There is no official military airport in Tian'an?" Ning Ziyuan was stunned and then he nodded and said, "Yes. There will be one soon." Li Tianlan said calmly, "After this battle there will be one." Ning Ziyuan was shocked. Chapter 703. Ning Ziyuan finally accepted Li Tianlan's choice. The dark night was about to usher in the dawn. Countless troops were gathering in the depressing and strict Ningyan city. In the soaring fighting spirit, Ning Ziyuan stood in front of the window and silently looked at the dark sky. The helicopter signal light was faintly flashing in the distance, blurred and then disappeared. Li Tianlan's plane had completely flown over the warning line controlled by the Freedom Corps. Ning Ziyuan was silent. As a famous general of Jianghu State promoted by Li Honghe, his relationship with Li Guangtu was not close. When he rose to the top, Li Honghe had already discovered Li Guangtu's ambition for the Wang family of Beihai. During the most delicate period of the relationship between the father and son, Ning Ziyuan had been promoted by Li Honghe all the way up. It was for this reason that when Li Honghe took the Li family to the border, he was not greatly implicated because he did not have a close relationship with Li Guangtu and he took the olive branch extended by the Wang family of Beihai. However, although he was not implicated, his journey in the military world of Jianghu State for many years was far from smooth. The Wang family of Beihai still had concerns about him. In terms of appointment, they would not consider him for many important posts. In the Eastern Theater of Operations, he had been a chief of staff for nearly 10 years. His promotion was entirely due to Wu Jingmin, who was in Jianghu, who had gathered some old people to work within the Southeast Group and barely pushed him to the position of commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations. However, he was not very strong in this position. He almost broke up with his biological son, Ning Chenqing. When Li Tianlan just entered the secular world, he and Ning Chenqing killed Tan Shilai, which led to the revenge of Tan Qinghua, the second in command of the Eastern Theater of Operations. In the final analysis, the reason for all this was that he did not get much support from the Southeast Group as the top leader, so he always felt a little lack of confidence. The Wang family of Beihai had never trusted him enough, so he had no special feelings about leaving the Southeast Group. Ning Ziyuan did not think that he had betrayed the Southeast Group. He had always been loyal to the Li family. When Li Honghe went to the border, it was also Li Honghe's idea that he did not go with him. The Li family lurked at the border. He lurked in the Southeast Group with an identity that the Wang family of Beihai did not know. Alkaid. This code name meant many things. Dubhe, Merak, Fekta, Migrez, Alioth, Mizar and Alkaid. They were the 7 spies that Li Honghe had left in Jianghu State back then. They were not many but they played a vital role at some point. Fekta died in East Island to save Li Tianlan in the final battle of Heaven Capital. Before he died, he was the sunset shadow of Sai City. It looked a little inconspicuous, but no one knew what Sunset Shadow had done before she joined Sai City. Ning Ziyuan had been in contact with Migrez the entire time. Apart from Migrez, he didn't even know who the others were. Out of the 7 of them, Yao Guang was ranked the last. He hadn't had it easy these past few years, but out of the 7 of them, he had the least pressure. However, Ning Ziyuan knew very well that some things required dedication and sacrifice. He didn't know what he would have to pay, but he was already mentally prepared. It was his sacrifice to move from the Eastern Theater of Operations to Tian'an. To some extent, it was a compromise of the Wang family of Beihai that they didn't push him to the end. And it was Ning Ziyuan who helped them get from Tian'an to Emperor Dong's palace. This was the gift that Li Honghe planned to give to Li Tianlan, and it was also the foundation of the Li family in the future. So even if the war between the five superpowers and Annan to invade the border hadn't broken out more than 3 years ago, another war would have broken out in Li Honghe's plan. The Freedom Corps, the Blood Battalion, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital were all concentrated in Tiannan. So Li Qianlan's path was already very clear. Emperor Dong's palace would get the full support of the Freedom Corps and integrate itself into Emperor Dong's palace during development. Then there would be civil war. Many forces in the Purgatory of Heaven capital who were loyal to Li Honghe and Li Tianlan would also join Emperor Dong's palace. This was a civil war of the Li family, and Li Honghe had enough confidence to let Li Tianlan win. Emperor Dong's palace, which had absorbed the Freedom Corps and the Purgatory of Heaven capital, had elites and experts. This was the real complete body. Emperor Dong's palace would dominate Tiannan, and with the full support of the Blood Battalion and the Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters, it would radiate to the whole Jianghu state and return to the peak. This process was extremely smooth. Even if there were bumps, it avoided accidents to the greatest extent. But what no one expected was that as soon as Li Honghe left, the Burning Legion became the biggest accident. The attack of the Burning Legion disrupted the Li family's plan. But Li Qianlan's subsequent response was crazy enough. Ramalan's existence was likely to be an obstacle to Li Qianlan's domination of Tiannan, but it was also likely to greatly shorten the process. And the key was today's battle. As long as Emperor Dong's palace took over the armaments of Tunan City, it would become one of the top forces in Tiannan in the shortest time. As for the problem of manpower, it was a problem that Ning Ziyuan could solve, so it was not a problem he was worried about. But now, in the battle tonight, Li Qianlan's available manpower was still too few after all. Ning Ziyuan was a little worried and hesitant. He stood in front of the window for a long time and took out his mobile phone several times, but in the end he did not dial. There was a knock on the door. "Come in." Ning Ziyuan raised his eyebrows. The door was pushed open in a hurry. A middle-aged man with a Freedom Corps rank on his shoulders strode in and said in a loud voice, "Commander, our soldiers have assembled and are ready to fight back at any time." This was a middle-aged man with an extremely rough appearance. One could even say that he was rude and unreasonable. He had a strong body, a ferocious appearance and a bald head. As he spoke, a shocking battle intent and murderous aura gathered on his body. The first deputy commander of the Freedom Corps. Wang Zhaojian. This was Di Jiangji. He was the right-hand man when he was in charge of the Freedom Corps and the cousin of Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Army. As Ning Ziyuan changed sides and came to the Freedom Corps, Wang Zhaojian also became the most powerful person to balance Ning Ziyuan. It seemed that no matter where he was in charge, he never had an easy time. There was always a strong deputy holding him back. Ning Ziyuan thought in a self-deprecating way, but he said indifferently, "Don't worry, wait a little longer." Wait for what? Wang Zhaojian was a little surprised. At this time, the Burning Legion has just taken Tunan City, and the whole army is in a period of exhaustion. Our momentum is at its peak and it's a good time to fight back. I said wait a little longer, Ning Ziyuan said flatly. Ning Ziyuan said flatly. His voice was not heavy, but it carried an irresistible majesty. I don't think it's necessary to wait. Commander, I can be the vanguard. I'll give those bastards of the Burning Legion a hard blow first. Wang Zhaojian straightened his neck and said loudly. Ning Ziyuan narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Do you want to violate the military order?" Wang Zhaojian's momentum paused and he gritted his teeth. "Commander, His Highness has just flown over our heads. We must support him. Wait a little longer. This is also His Highness's idea." A sneer flashed in Ning Ziyuan's eyes. His Highness wants to take Tunan City by himself. If you go there now, he won't appreciate it. Take Tunan City by himself? He's crazy. Wang Zhaojian's exclamation suddenly stopped. As the second in command of the Freedom Corps, he was naturally not a fool. Not everyone who looked like a fool was a fool. He instantly understood Li Qianlan's intention. Take Tunan City by myself. Damn it, does Emperor Dong's palace want to monopolize the armaments of our Freedom Corps? His eyes instantly focused. It's not as serious as you said. His Highness just wants to show his strength. As for the armaments, what's the difference whether they are in the hands of the Freedom Corps or Emperor Dong's palace? By then, Jianghu State will give us a reasonable way to deal with it. Ning Ziyuan said calmly. I don't believe it. Wang Zhaojian growled and sneered. Commander, we're not fools. Those armaments are in Li Qianlan's hands. Do you really think he will return them? I don't speculate about things that haven't happened. Ning Ziyuan said flatly. Wang Zhaojian was silent for a while and suddenly said, "I see, Commander." He waved his hand and closed the office door. Looking into Ning Ziyuan's eyes, he said word by word, "You want to give this batch of armaments to Emperor Dong's palace." He was eager to fight back because he wanted to take Tunan City as soon as possible and grab Tunan and the armaments. But he did not consider that Li Tianlan wanted to monopolize them. Now Ning Ziyuan's attitude showed that he wanted to give the armaments to Li Tianlan. Those were weapons and equipment that could arm 20,000 people. It might be a good thing for Ning Ziyuan, but for the Wang family of Beihai, it was a disaster. "I will never agree." Wang Zhaojian's voice was extremely cold. He was the deputy commander of the Freedom Corps. If Li Tianlan took the armaments in front of him, God knew how many points he would lose in the Southeast Group. "You're slandering me." Ning Ziyuan's voice was playful. "Slandering?" Wang Zhaojian laughed. "Isn't it the truth? Well, even if it isn't, it will be soon. When the armaments fall into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace, the Freedom Corps will lose nearly half of its military weapons. How can we explain it to Jianghu State? How can we explain it to the army headquarters? Not only you but all of us will be punished. As the commander of the army you will even—" His voice paused and his face suddenly became a little strange. "What will happen to me?" Ning Ziyuan asked back. His voice was still calm and calm. Wang Zhaojian finally sensed Ning Ziyuan's real emotion from his calmness. He was fearless. At this moment, Ning Ziyuan was really fearless. Wang Zhaojian wanted to say that Jianghu State might divide Ning Ziyuan because of this and even remove him from the position of commander of the army. Even if some people would disagree, the Prince Group, the Southeast Group, and the Special Warfare Group would definitely reach a consensus because of their common interests in this regard. At that time, neither the academics nor the giant group could stop them. But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he suddenly couldn't go on. Remove Ning Ziyuan? Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi really couldn't stop them. They wouldn't even stop them at all. The problem was, who would replace Ning Ziyuan after this batch of armaments was removed? Or who dared to replace him? At least Wang Zhaojian didn't dare. He really didn't dare. Ning Ziyuan lost his position because of Li Tianlan. Whoever replaced him would be directly targeted by Li Tianlan. Not just targeted. Li Tianlan. In the more than 3 years since he entered the secular world, there were all kinds of comments about Li Tianlan, but no one had ever said that Li Tianlan was a good-tempered person. This was in Tianan, the purgatory of heaven capital, Annan City, the burning legion, the free forces. In such a delicate situation, if Li Tianlan was hostile to the new commander of the army, Wang Zhaoyang was smart. He was sure that if Ning Ziyuan was removed and he took the position of commander of the army, Li Tianlan would definitely react immediately. At that time he might not even survive the day he took office and might be smashed by Li Tianlan's sword light. At that time he could just find someone to frame him. If he could think of this, how could others not think of it? The commander of the Freedom Corps was a good position, but now it seemed that whether it was the Southeast Group, the Special Warfare Group, or the Prince Group, they were simply courting death by sending people to pick this fruit. If they didn't send people, they couldn't get the Freedom Corps, and it would be meaningless to remove Ning Ziyuan. So Ning Ziyuan was not afraid of this at all. Wang Zhaojian gritted his teeth and said, "I want to communicate with the army headquarters." In this case, communicating with the army headquarters was tantamount to complaining about Ning Ziyuan. Ning Ziyuan nodded and said indifferently, "Whatever." Both of them knew that such a complaint was just a way to get out of the situation. Wang Zhaojian was going with the flow. Now Dongqing Wudi was in charge of the army headquarters. He had the right to complain but not the right to decide anything. When Dongqing Wudi communicated with Ning Ziyuan could find any reason, and Dongqing Wudi would feel that it made sense. Other people in the army headquarters might not think so. It didn't matter. It was a meeting. Dongqing Wudi had the final say on how long the meeting would last. All those who had different opinions could discuss slowly and in detail, then demonstrate their views and prepare manpower. In the process, if Wang Zhaojian couldn't hold back, let alone whether he could mobilize the Freedom Corps without Ning Ziyuan's permission. Even if he could, such an action was enough for Ning Ziyuan to define him as a traitor who disobeyed the orders of the army headquarters. Li Tianlan was also happy to send the traitor's head to Mount Dibing. Therefore Ning Ziyuan didn't bother to appease Wang Zhaojian. If there was no accident, this powerful deputy commander would most likely be transferred away after this battle as long as he didn't want to die. Therefore there was no point in appeasing him. He waved his hand and said slowly, "If there's nothing else, you go ahead. I'll study it." Wang Zhaojian gritted his teeth and snorted. He turned around and strode away, slamming the door heavily. Ning Ziyuan walked back to the bed and looked in the direction of Tunan City. The signal light of the helicopter in the night sky had completely disappeared. There was only darkness in front of him. Tunan City was out of his reach. The night was slowly receding. The helicopter was still moving forward. Li Tianlan sat quietly in the cabin, looking at Tunan City, which was still shining with lights in the hazy night. He was as quiet as a shadow floating in the cabin. Tunan City was getting closer and closer. Countless lights were shining in front of him. "Your Highness, we're about to enter the Burning Legion's warning line." The co-pilot of the helicopter turned around and reported loudly. Li Tianlan looked at the time. At this time, it was unlikely that Li Badian Eagle King, or the elders of the Li family could get close to the base. When the base was not restrained, the helicopter might be greeted by endless gunfire and even missiles if it violated the warning line of Tunan City. So the helicopter had to be fast. It was best to fly over Tunan City's airspace before the base in Tunan City reacted. The only advantage was that the Burning Legion had just occupied Tunan City. At this time, it was probably only enough for them to clean up the damage. They didn't even have time to get familiar with the equipment of the Freedom Legion. Li Tianlan nodded and stood up. Boundless sword chi slowly circled around him and instantly boiled. "Speed up and rise." Li Tianlan said slowly, "Get ready to return." The helicopter had finished its task by sending him here. He didn't need support or a so-called retreat. There was never a retreat for his plan. The enemy was in front of him. Kill them. This was the only way. The helicopter sped up in the roar and began to rise higher and higher in the air. The signal light was completely turned off. The helicopter rushed straight to Tunan City with a huge shadow. Li Tianlan opened the hatch. The wind was howling. Countless sword intents were boiling around him. The co-pilot of the helicopter looked at Li Tianlan nervously. In his eyes, Li Tianlan changed. He became someone else. An incomparably deep darkness enveloped his entire body. The darkness slowly floated around him, as if the boundless night had draped a veil over his body. A simple but extremely gorgeous long black windbreaker appeared on him. As if it was tailor-made for him, the black windbreaker fit him perfectly. The cuffs, the collar, the waist, and the hem of the knee, the extremely exquisite black was fluttering in the wind. Wisps of golden light flickered on the windbreaker. The windbreaker danced wildly in the air. Li Tianlan's figure was motionless. The helicopter rushed over the sky of Tunan City. Li Tianlan looked down, condescending. The next moment, a calm and majestic voice suddenly shook heaven and earth, "Mighty and mighty. Lamelun, come out and accept your death." The long night was coming to an end. Li Tianlan reached out his hand. In silence, the boiling sword intent covered the night sky. The first ray of dawn seemed to bloom in his hand. The helicopter rushed over quickly. In the open hatch, Li Tianlan didn't stop at all. With the first ray of light in his hand, he rushed directly to Tunan, which was shining with lights. Light. The extremely bright light burst out in the air in an instant like a meteor. The surging light directly tore the night sky of Tunan City in the most ostentatious manner. It was swift, domineering, arrogant, and dreamy. The god of war descended to the world. The sword light completely covered the world with Li Tianlan as the center. The night had been completely torn apart by the sword light. The lights in the city were extremely dim under the reflection of the sword light. Li Tianlan's figure was falling faster and faster. Only the sword light kept flying, tearing everything. This was the Li family's martial arts. This was Li Tianlan's own unique skill. This move. Chapter 704. At this moment, no words could describe Li Tianlan's momentum. At the moment when the night alternated with the dawn, the sword light all over the sky pulled him down from the sky. The night, the dawn, and the morning sun. Everything was being torn apart. The transparent but extremely dazzling sword light was indescribably gorgeous in the night. Li Tianlan's figure was like a meteor. It passed in a flash, cutting the sky, breaking the sea, and splitting the sky. If the forever still world was a comprehensive move of all his sword intents, then the single sword intents created by Li Tianlan condensing the 24 moves of sword during the 3 years of travel had their own strengths. Cutting the sky was the move with the most killing intent. It was reckless and indomitable. There was no change or defense in this move. The moment the sword intent condensed, the lethality had reached the limit of no change. The world was shaking, the space was breaking, and the sword energy was burning. Li Tianlan was also burning. His black windbreaker drew a black line in the air. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with violence and madness. Chess Emperor, East Peak, all the experts who died in the hospital raid, and all the experts of Emperor Dong's palace who died in the raid. The Li family's future and past. Is Tiannan. They were all under this sword. The brightly lit city hall instantly narrowed the distance between Li Tianlan and him. Li Tianlan's speed was getting faster and faster. Looking at the most luxurious building in Tunan City, he stretched out his palm. At this moment, there was no sword in his hand. But his whole body had turned into an invincible sharp sword. In the years of turmoil and chaos in Tiannan, there had never been such a shining edge. The sword energy was surging and collapsing. Countless transparent sword energy suddenly burst into colorful brilliance when they approached the ground. The burning sword light directly smashed Li Tianlan into the city hall. The white rainbow pierced the sun. The rainbow crossed the sky. How dare you? In the frenzied sword intent, a roar of surprise and anger suddenly sounded, shaking the whole city. There was obvious astonishment and disbelief in this voice, as well as a trace of anger for being despised. Ramiro really didn't expect it. He had just conquered Tunan City a few hours ago. The meeting in the conference room had just ended, and his men were mobilizing the army. At this time, Li Tianlan had already come to his door. From Lin and to Tiannan. This reaction speed. Li Tianlan should have set off when he received the news from Tiannan. These few hours were just enough for him to reach Tiannan from Lin and then he launched his attack. A single person had descended upon Tiannan, which was occupied by the Burning Legion. What did he take the Burning Legion for? Who did he think he was? Anger and killing intent took over Ramon's mind at the same time. Kacha. The huge ceiling of the city hall was torn apart by the sharp sword chi. A dazzling light appeared in Ramiro's sight. Without any hesitation, Ramiro raised his hands. His domain, which had been condensed to the extreme, enveloped the city hall, and a majestic power erupted from Ramiro's body. He was a real Invincible Realm expert who had been in the Invincible Realm for several years. If he hadn't deliberately kept a low profile, how could the former top expert in Africa be Black Ghost? No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, Ramiro had no reason to back down. Ramiro punched. His speed was extremely fast, but in the silent domain, his every movement became incomparably clear, the berserk power pulling on his body. City Hall, all the space inside was torn apart by the sudden burst of power. A deep vortex spun wildly around Ramiro. His fist swung upward and his whole body was brought up by this punch. Li Tianlan went down. Ramiro went up. The dark vortex and the dazzling sword light suddenly collided in midair. Boom! There was a loud noise. The sky fell and the earth cracked. Endless strong light suddenly burst out in midair. The violent power and the sharp sword chi swept everything. The torn space was constantly twisted, bringing up a large gust of wind. The wind blew the tiles and fallen leaves in the city, and the huge destructive force directly penetrated the ground from midair. Large pieces of cracks appeared on the already ordinary road in Tunan City. There was no stalemate. No one could even see that they were evenly matched. The moment the sword light collided with the domain, Ramiro's upward momentum suddenly stopped. The domain was spinning wildly. But the infinite sword intent was getting brighter and brighter. Li Tianlan's figure slowly descended with the sword light. In the thick domain, Ramiro, who was in the Invincible Realm, kept sliding in the air. The sword light kept flashing and flying. The commander of the Burning Legion, the god in the hearts of everyone in the Burning Legion, was actually pressed down from the air by this sword. Boom! Two loud noises sounded almost at the same time. Li Tianlan's figure pressed down on Ramelin and directly smashed the thick walls of the city hall. Dust flew everywhere. The sword intent and the domain entangled and destroyed the city hall, which had a history of more than 100 years, completely collapsed in an instant. The dust that was enough to cover everyone's sight continued to rise. Ramelin's heavy fist smashed into Li Tianlan's palm, but Li Tianlan held it tightly. The two of them fell from the air in such a posture. The huge impact caused Ramelin's whole body to be embedded in the ground. Li Tianlan continued to rush forward. His body was embedded in the ground, and only his chest was above the ground. Ramiro retreated in the huge force and sword intent. His body tore the ground apart, leaving a gully nearly 50 meters long. Puff! Thick blood spurted out of Ramiro's mouth in an instant. His eyes were filled with absolute horror and disbelief. Blood kept spurting out of his mouth, and his internal organs seemed to be displaced in an instant. One move. Just one move. Ramiro, who had been in his peak state, was now seriously injured. At this moment, Ramiro felt like he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He had never seen this sword move before. But he could understand what the sword intent of this sword move meant. Kill the heavens. Li Tianlan deliberately gave up all the changes and defenses of this sword move. This sword move had accumulated momentum and power in order to absolutely have an earth-shattering lethality. Ramiro was really very familiar with this sword move. He gave up everything and only pursued lethality. Lethality, it sounded like it, but what if he changed the words? What Li Tianlan showed in this sword move was not some bullshit lethality at all. This was an outburst. An outburst. This is not the sword of the Li family. Amidst the gushing blood, Ramiro let out a strenuous roar. In terms of thinking, the kill the heavens was completely the way of the Wang family of Beihai. He ignored everything and only sought an outburst. This is my sword. Every joint in Li Tianlan's body was shaking, as if he was groaning because of the huge force. The force was always mutual. He knew how destructive this sword move was on Ramiro, and he had to bear almost that much destructive force. He almost had to bear so much destructive power. The absolute outbreak was to exert the lethality beyond the peak. As the sword intent scattered, a lot of blood gushed out of Li Tianlan's eyes, ears, nostrils and mouth corners. But his eyes were extremely bright like stars. In his normal state, it was difficult for him to be Ramiro's opponent. The sword move given to him by the master of Samsara Palace in Mormons had caused serious damage in his body. He swept across Beihai, destroyed the devil troop, killed DK and fought against Jianghu. His injuries accumulated again and again. His martial arts were advancing by leaps and bounds, but his injuries were also getting more and more serious. No matter how great the vitality of the dragon vein was, there must be a limit. And now it was the limit. But Li Tianlan was still unscrupulous. Maybe for Ramiro this was just a battle. But for Li Tianlan he came here just to kill. That was the madness supported by an absolutely firm will. Injuries? Li Tianlan didn't care. Even if he was seriously injured, he still dared to exchange injuries with Ramiro. He could afford it, but Ramiro might not. In the loud sound of collapse, Li Tianlan's palm retracted slightly. A touch of dark green light appeared in his hand. The subtle light kept stretching. Ramiro pulled his body out of the ground and instinctively chose to retreat. The delicate little sword spun rapidly in the dark green light, flashing and getting bigger and bigger. Finally, it turned into a dark green giant sword. 13 floors, aquamarine sword. Li Tianlan's palm shook violently, and the violent sword energy surged out of the huge sword. Naturally. At this moment, Li Tianlan and Aquamarine were completely inseparable. The nearby elites of the Burning Legion rushed over immediately. Ramiro's figure retreated quickly and pushed directly into the crowd. The Invincible Realm expert, who had never shown the dignity of an Invincible Realm expert in the Dark World, was not embarrassed at all. As soon as his figure fell into the crowd, he suddenly waved his hand and shouted, "Kill him!" Li Tianlan raised his head slightly. His palm clenched the hilt of the huge aquamarine sword. Bang! An incomparably loud heartbeat suddenly sounded on the dusty battlefield. All the soldiers instinctively stopped for a moment. Ramiro raised his eyebrows slightly and was about to speak. A shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. The shadow was so vague. The morning sun shone on the earth. But the night had not dissipated. In the blurry sky, Ramiro subconsciously chose to ignore this unusual shadow the first time he saw it. The shadow shook for a moment, and then took a step forward. He took a step. The shadow dissipated. Li Tianlan appeared directly in front of Ramiro. Shadow formula. Shadows appeared around Li Tianlan one after another, vivid and lifelike. Li Tianlan raised the aquamarine sword in his hand and held it high. Countless shadows raised their hands at the same time. The giant sword, which was completely condensed by sword energy, appeared in the hands of the shadows and became one. "You," Li Tianlan's voice rang out, "go to hell." The huge aquamarine sword suddenly smashed down. It spun. In an instant, a bloody storm appeared in the sword light all over the sky. Li Tianlan's spinning figure swept through the crowd wildly. Flesh and blood flew all over the sky. The eighth blade, burning heaven. Chapter 705. The sword energy swept through the city hall like a storm. Blood-colored light rose into the sky. This was a cold-blooded and brutal massacre. Spin. Li Tianlan's body spun wildly. The huge blade of the aquamarine sword cut through the space, and the majestic power was evenly scattered in every direction. Shadows merged with Li Tianlan's body one after another. The sword light shone brighter and the sword energy kept flying with the spurting blood. The crowd rushed forward crazily. The incessant sword light tore through the crowd and kept spinning with blood. Standing in Ramelin's direction and looking over, the sword light in the crowd turned into a perfect circle with Li Tianlan as the center. The circular arc rotated wildly, and because it was so fast and violent, it gave people a feeling of stillness. It was a perfect, static, illusory and extremely balanced sword move. The sword energy kept spreading and shooting in the rotation. The arc in sight kept expanding and getting bigger and bigger. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. 50 meters. The blood that gushed into the sky did not stop at all. There were deaths everywhere. Flesh and blood danced in the air. The rotating sword light that covered dozens of meters had already turned into a bloody vortex that kept reaping human lives. The vortex spun ferociously and devoured everything. This was a truly invincible sword move. When Li Tianlan first came into contact with the 24 moves of sword when he was very young, the first sword move he learned was the 8th blade. This balance, this perfection, this naturalness was everything. These were Li Honghe's original words. In the 24 moves of sword, this was the sword move Li Tianlan was most familiar with. It was most suitable for group battles. Its lethality might not be the strongest, but because of its absolute balance, this sword move had no flaws. This sword move was a storm and a vortex. Wherever the sword energy passed, the ruins of the city hall were completely turned into a field of death. The bloody vortex, which had spread to nearly 80 meters, rolled up the bloody light into the sky, like a huge wave. 9 seconds. The 8th blade, which carried the infinite sword light, rushed over nearly 40 meters. The soaring blood fell with a roar. Wherever it passed, there were broken corpses and flesh and blood everywhere. Li Tianlan stopped. The attacking Burning Legion also stopped. In 9 seconds they who had always risked their lives in the face of the violent killing finally felt fear. Ramiro's body trembled slightly, and a hint of unconcealable fear appeared in his eyes. Li Tianlan looked back at the way he came. The dark red blood had almost piled up to the point where corpses could be soaked in it. The entire world seemed to be dyed in the color of blood. Death spread everywhere. It was sinister and tragic. Blood flowed like a river and corpses were strewn everywhere. It wasn't just Ramiro and the Burning Legion. Even Li Tianlan's body was trembling slightly. The road in front of him was getting clearer and clearer, but everything he saw made him tremble. If there were no accidents, this might be a peak that he would never be able to replicate in his life. This kind of peak did not refer to the lethality. Instead, it was referring to the number of enemies killed. In 9 seconds, the huge whirlpool with a range of nearly 80 meters rushed through the crowd of 40 meters. At least 1,000 elites had died of unnatural causes. The so-called abnormality was because most of the people had their bodies sliced into pieces by the surging sword light. More than 1,000 people died without a complete corpse. In the past decades or even centuries in the Dark World, it seemed that no one had done this except for murderous weapons. In less than 10 seconds, thousands of people were beheaded. Wang Qianzong had never done such a thing. It was not that he couldn't do it, but he had never done it. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to do it. Li Tianlan breathed deeply. His brain was a little dizzy and his body began to become weak. The pungent smell of blood and the hellish scene kept stimulating his will. He gritted his teeth, looked at Ramiro and said slowly, "This is a group of real soldiers. This move of burning heaven must be a coincidence." This was the extreme of Li Tianlan's killing intent and rage. But it was enough to show the ferocity of the Burning Legion. No matter how powerful Li Tianlan was, if he faced a group of enemies who knew how to retreat, he could not cause such lethality. This miraculous number of enemies killed was also because of the Burning Legion. They did not retreat. In the face of death, in the face of almost crazy slaughter, in 9 seconds, bathed in blood and wailing, the Burning Legion did only one thing from beginning to end. No one flinched. From beginning to end, the formation of the Burning Legion was not even the slightest bit disorganized. They saw Li Tianlan and then rushed up, one after another, without hesitation. They were fighting and finally died in front of Li Tianlan. But no one ran away. Not a single one. This was a fighting quality that was enough to move anyone. Li Tianlan finally understood why the Burning Legion could break through the defense of Tunan City overnight without any masters. He also understood why Tunan City still fell into the hands of Ramelin despite the 5,000 soldiers of the Thunderbolt Battalion. In more than 3 years, it was not that the Thunderbolt Battalion had deteriorated. It was that the Burning Legion in front of him was a real elite that was no worse than the Thunderbolt Battalion. Every one of them seemed to have a fighting spirit that surpassed death. This was a real soldier. And also an eternal soldier. You have to pay the price. Ramiro finally said, stressing each word. His eyes were still filled with fear, but gradually a touch of blood appeared in them. Extreme rage and panic appeared in his eyes at the same time. His expression was distorted, looking extremely crazy. The total size of the Burning Legion was less than 100,000 people. Of course, not every one of them could be like the Thunderbolt Battalion. Such people were the trump cards of the Burning Legion. The total number barely reached 20,000, and this time Ramiro brought all of them. But now, they had just experienced a battle in Tunan City. They still had too many regrets. As a result, Li Tianlan directly killed at least 1,000 people with one stroke of his sword. More than 1/20th of the Burning Legion's strength was directly buried in Li Tianlan's hands. This sword almost directly cut into Ramiro's heart. The pain almost made him lose all his senses. Damn you! Ramiro gnashed his teeth. Li Tianlan kept breathing deeply, his eyes getting colder and colder. The 8th blade appeared beside Ramelin. Ramelin dodged it very quickly. Li Tianlan's original intention was to disperse the crowd as quickly as possible and engage in close combat with Ramelin. However, he did not expect the Burning Legion to be so crazy. In such a situation, Li Tianlan consumed an unimaginable amount of physical strength every time he spun. If he stopped, he would be faced with endless attacks from all directions. In absolute rage and killing intent, Li Tianlan exerted the 8th blade to the extreme. He killed all the elites of the Burning Legion who stood in his way and faced Ramon once again. Ramiro finally stopped running away and wanted to fight him in close combat. But it was when Li Tianlan's physical strength was almost exhausted. Li Tianlan looked at Ramiro expressionlessly. Ramiro, whose eyes were blood-red, strode forward. His steps were as heavy as a mountain, and the whole ruins were shaking with a lot of smoke and dust. Li Tianlan, whose aura had become so weak that he could no longer hide it, narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Hurry up, I'm in a hurry." Ow! Ramiro's whole body suddenly swelled up. With a howl like that of a wild beast, his strong body appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan with the strength of a mountain. Li Tianlan did not move. He stood where he was, looking at Ramiro's fist that was getting bigger and bigger. His eyes were extremely clear. Swish, swish, swish. With a slight sound, the black windbreaker covering his body suddenly flew up in Ramiro's power. But the seemingly soft hem of the windbreaker was not moving backward, but forward. In an instant, the hem of the windbreaker was aimed at Ramiro at the same time. Ramiro's fist approached Li Tianlan. The black windbreaker suddenly swelled up. In an instant, Ramiro's eyes were filled with darkness. It was an incomparably deep darkness, but it was shining with wisps of golden light. Exclamations rang out from all directions. At this moment, in everyone's eyes, Li Tianlan's windbreaker directly turned into a huge black cloth that almost covered the sky and the earth. Ramiro's fist hit the windbreaker. Clang! There was no dull sound. Instead, there was a roar of a fist hitting metal in the air. Ramiro suddenly let out a miserable scream. The moment his fist came into contact with the windbreaker, he felt endless sword energy. It was dense, sharp, and invincible. His fist was pierced by the sword energy in an instant. Blood dripped, revealing the ghastly white bones. In the next second, the ever-expanding trench coat enveloped Ramiro's entire body. Silence. Darkness. The whole dark world kept compressing, squeezing toward Ramiro. Ramiro let out a wild roar, and endless power completely burst out in the darkness. He finally saw the light. Beams of pale golden light shone in the darkness, turning into the most dazzling and pure sword light. Boom! The majestic golden sword light pierced through Ramiro's domain. Fresh blood gushed out from all over his body as his domain was completely shattered by the sword light. Amidst the surging explosion, his body was sent flying, and blood splattered all the way to the ground. Li Tianlan's body was also pushed away in the aftermath of the explosion of the domain. His face grew paler and his aura weaker, but his eyes became calmer and calmer. The black windbreaker fluttered in the wind, and with the vast and faint sword energy, it fell on Li Tianlan again. Silent, indifferent, and cold. But at this moment, Ramiro clearly felt a sense of sarcasm. What the hell is this? Ramiro got up from the ground and stared at the black windbreaker. He said in a hoarse voice, "This is my friend." Li Tianlan said quietly. He raised his palms slightly. The windbreaker draped over his body fluttered and kept changing. Finally, it turned into a huge black sword. However, although the huge sword was still majestic, it was a little dimmer. This is the Xianyuan sword. Li Tianlan looked at Ramiro calmly and asked, "How do you want to die?" Chapter 706. How do you want to die? From the beginning, Li Tianlan did not hide his killing intent. But it was not until this moment that Ramiro realized the seriousness of the problem. Li Tianlan had fully proved his strength and power. The Xianyuan sword had also proved its unparalleled sharpness. One man and one sword. Even if they were not at their peak, the combination of the two made Li Tianlan exude an irresistible strength. Therefore, Li Tianlan was quite confident when he said that. The Xianyuan sword trembled slightly in his hand, and the extremely fierce blade gradually softened. The deep black with a slightly shining golden light covered Li Tianlan's arm, and finally covered his body, turning into a black windbreaker again. The dawn completely dispelled the darkness. The sun rose. Bathed in the pale golden sunlight, Li Tianlan opened his hands. The black windbreaker clung to his body completely. In the hell-like scene, Li Tianlan closed his eyes, and his whole body was extremely ethereal. One after another, pure sword energy completely wrapped him up, constantly surging around him. Ramiro's pupils contracted slightly for a moment. At this moment he saw clearly that all the sword energy in front of him came from the Xianyuan sword, not from Li Tianlan himself. At this moment, Li Tianlan was plundering. And the Xianyuan sword was offering in silence. He borrowed the sword energy from the Xianyuan sword. The black windbreaker looked darker and darker. But with the help of the majestic sword energy of the Xianyuan sword, Li Tianlan's weak aura began to recover quickly. It was just like when God lent the sword energy to Li Tianlan in Reki City. With the help of the sword energy of the Xianyuan sword, Li Tianlan once again suppressed his internal injuries and temporarily returned to his peak state. The bright sun shone on the ruins of the Tunan City Hall. In the blood and broken bodies on the ground, Li Tianlan slowly opened his eyes. His eyes shone with pale golden sword light, sharp and majestic. "Have you thought about it?" he asked, glancing at Ramiro. He was calm. Ramiro's body suddenly tightened, and his eyes were in a trance for a moment. He did not know how many years ago it was. It was so long ago that he had almost completely forgotten it. Countless scenes flashed in his mind. It seemed that he was carrying out a mission in a small country in eastern Africa. At that time he was still very young. His troops were scattered in the war and suffered heavy losses. At the end of his rope, he met the man who went to Africa from Jianghu state to inspect his foundation. It was a complete coincidence that he, who was at the end of his rope, ate barbecued meat in the primeval forest of Africa with him. At that time, a man who was about the same age as him also looked at him calmly and asked him, "How do you want to live?" At that time, Ramon's heart was filled with confusion and despair. There were many ways to live in his heart, but he couldn't say any of them in that situation. The young man just waited quietly and patiently. After more than 10 minutes he asked again, "Have you made up your mind?" Back then Ramiro just shook his head subconsciously. The calm, indifferent, seemingly unsmiling young man patted him on the shoulder and said something that he still remembered clearly. "In fact, the best way to live is to live by my side." That was the beginning of the Burning Legion. It was also the starting point of Ramiro's life. In a trance, after many years, Ramiro heard a similar question again. Just like in the past, he was honest. He shook his head. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly for a long time before he said faintly, "In fact, the best way to die is to die in my hands." Time kept repeating the old things. The past was the starting point. And now Ramiro did not know if it was the end. He suddenly regretted coming to Tiannan and attacking Emperor Dong's palace. At this moment, Li Tianlan did not show overwhelming strength, but Ramiro suddenly felt that he was extremely terrifying. Regret rolled in his heart, but there was only helplessness and bitterness in his eyes. He slowly raised his palm. The Burning Legion, which was ready to make a move, suddenly fell silent. "Step back." In the dull voice, Ramiro's order was simple and straightforward. After a short silence, the Burning Legion began to retreat. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly and did not make any comments. That move of burning sky was enough to wake Ramelan up completely. Within the huge and somewhat exaggerated killing range, it was impossible for Ramelan to get rid of Li Tianlan's entanglement with his speed. If the two of them were entangled together, the elites around them would be of no use until Li Tianlan's physical strength was exhausted. So Ramiro ordered all the soldiers to retreat, but he did not completely leave the battlefield. I thought of some bad things. Ramiro looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, but it's not reality. Your Highness Li Tianlan, the reality is that I don't think I'm worse than you. Maybe I'll lose, but I won't lose. Because this is my Tunin. You will not only face me but also my burning legion of nearly 10,000 people. Maybe in another hour this number will increase several times. I don't want to die. He said seriously, I don't think you can win either. So I have to ask you to die today. He held out his hand to Li Tianlan and said solemnly, please. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. He seemed to want to say something, but Ramiro seemed to have suddenly sensed great danger. He suddenly roared, clenched his fist and smashed it directly behind him. At the same time, Li Tianlan's body became blurred, and his real body came directly behind Ramiro. Bang! The two fists collided with each other with great force. Ramiro's whole body swelled visibly. The huge force supported his body, making his every move look extremely fierce. With a violent roar, he turned completely and directly pounced on Li Tianlan. The tremendous power turned into a domain that seemed to be a substance, constantly shaking. Li Tianlan's body suddenly rose into the air. In an instant the azure light covered the sky. The huge azure sword vibrated wildly, and the dazzling light covered Ramiro's domain like a waterfall. The domain was completely shattered by the surging sword light, but the loud roar became more and more frenzied. Without retreating or hesitating, Ramiro faced the fierce sword energy and moved forward. Blood kept spurting out from his body, but Ramiro also appeared in front of Li Tianlan. At this moment he really did everything at all costs. He might not be Li Tianlan's opponent. He might be defeated. He might be seriously injured. But as long as he didn't die, it could only be Li Tianlan who would die. The most terrible thing about Li Tianlan was his momentum. The chaos in Eastern Europe, from Reki City to Mormons. It swept across Beihai from Autumn Water to Mount Dibing. Countless battles and the death of several invincible realm experts had made Li Tianlan develop a truly invincible temperament. His confidence and willpower had reached the real peak, so every time he made a move, it had incredible destructive power. But Ramiro was very sure that Li Tianlan's real strength might not be stronger than his. He was going to destroy everything about Li Tianlan in the most barbaric way. He might fall. But Li Tianlan would inevitably pay a huge price. At that time, it would be impossible for him to have the strength to break through the encirclement of the Burning Legion. In other words, as long as he was willing, Li Tianlan would definitely die today. Ramiro was more than willing. He was completely ready to risk everything. He rushed forward. Approached. Attacked. The flying sword light kept falling on him. Ramiro approached Li Tianlan in the most barbaric way. In an instant, the attacks completely enveloped Li Tianlan like a storm. At this moment, Ramiro was alone. But countless attacks fell at the same time. His whole body seemed to have turned into a huge wave that could topple mountains and overturn seas, roaring and directly covering Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's extension became more and more dazzling. The sword energy of the Shenyuan sword merged with him. His pupils were burning with golden light. Endless attacks fell, and the aquamarine sword disappeared from his hand. Of the 13 floors with the Shenyuan sword as the core, only the aquamarine sword and the twilight sword were left. The two swords rotated wildly around him, defending automatically. Li Tianlan had already rushed up without any retreat. The dragon roar resounded through the sky. Dragon Fist, Azure Dragon Cannon. This was the toughest and fiercest move in the Dragon Fist. As Li Tianlan moved forward, this move of Azure Dragon Cannon had been fully exerted to the limit. Li Tianlan's body directly blasted over like a cannonball. Bang! With a dull sound, their fists collided once again. Ramiro's body shook violently, and blood spurted out of Li Tianlan's body at the same time. No retreat. Dragon Fist, Azure Dragon Arrow. Li Tianlan's body was like a bow, instantly straightening. His clenched fists directly drove his body forward. One step. It was less than half a meter away. But the sudden burst of power of the Dragon Fist directly shattered the space and smashed hard on Ramiro's elbow. Ah! Ramiro roared. The pain completely ignited the blood in his body. He had gone completely crazy. A large blur of light and shadow burst out from his hands. He stretched out his palm and pressed it on Li Tianlan's shoulder. Then he pressed it down and hit his knee. Li Tianlan didn't put up any defense. His entire body was sent flying by Ramelin. Ramelin's hard knees almost broke his sternum. Blood gushed out of his mouth. His body was in the air, but he was still attacking. Dragon fist, flying dragon in the sky. Kill? Li Tianlan's eyes were red. At this moment he had completely given up everything. When he broke out with all his strength, his whole body carried an indescribable demonic nature. He was hysterical and wouldn't stop until he was dead. Dragon fist, divine dragon swings its tail. Dragon fist, dragon armor removal. Dragon fist, divine dragon shows its head. Attack, attack, attack. Kill, 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 kill. The whole world seemed to be shattered. Countless attacks broke out almost at the same time. Fast. The attacks with great power were exerted in an unprecedentedly dense and violent way. The dual wind and thunder veins were stretched to the extreme in an instant. Regardless of everything. Forward with indomitable will. Ramiro's eyes were full of attacks. The fist smashed directly on his head. Before his brain could react, his knee had already hit his lower abdomen. His elbow flashed in front of his eyes, and before the pain could spread to his body, the one-handed claw had already torn his flesh. Eruption. Regardless of everything. Hands and feet. At this moment, Li Tianlan's limbs had completely become the most powerful weapons. The dragon's roar had reached the extreme, which meant that his body had been completely stretched to the limit. In the violent power and speed, all of his attacks were playing a role almost at the same time. Uppercut, leg sweep, elbow strike, roundhouse. A large number of afterimages surged out crazily, densely packed. All the afterimages were attacking unceasingly. All of Ramiro's madness was forcibly suppressed once again. In the fierce collision, his body was directly sent flying by Li Tianlan. His body hit the thick wall, which was densely covered with cracks. Before he could move, Li Tianlan had directly rushed up to him. Boom. The wall broke in an instant. Smoke and dust flew all over the sky. Ramiro's body was pressed into the wall by Li Tianlan. Crack. The thick building completely collapsed under the tremendous force. Ramiro's body rushed out and fled to a restaurant opposite the city hall. His body broke through the restaurant's door and rushed in. The broken glass had not yet fallen to the ground. In the frenzied attack, the whole restaurant had been directly smashed by Li Tianlan. Smoke and dust, light and shadow, surging power and extreme madness. It wasn't that Ramiro didn't want to fight back, but under such a dense and crazy attack, he found that he couldn't find any chance to fight back. Because he was fast. Li Tianlan was too fast. Li Tianlan, who had gone all out, was full of flaws and all of them were nearly fatal. Ramelin could see them but he couldn't grasp them at all. Absolute flaws made all of them disappear in a flash. Ramelin's brain had just regained consciousness, and the previous flaws had already been replaced by new ones. However, the attacks in front of him were endless, and they would not stop until Li Tianlan was dead. The elites of the Burning Legion could no longer intervene in such a war. The two men, who were always close to each other, were completely violent in attack and passive in defense. Ramiro kept retreating, but he couldn't even put a little distance between them. He left the area of the city hall and even found a battlefield with complicated terrain. It didn't work. It didn't work. Li Tianlan had been attacking him from behind. Houses, walls, trees and vehicles. All the obstacles in front of him were blown up, but they didn't delay Li Tianlan even for a second. This was the most thorough suppression, a violent storm and unreasonable. For Ramiro this was the most unacceptable fiasco. A fair and square fiasco. Burning Legion. Ramiro suddenly roared, "Kill him!" His domain took shape again around him. The next moment, countless bullets roared and directly covered the two of them. Li Tianlan didn't stop at all. All the bullets turned into powder under the sword energy and domain. His physical strength was being consumed crazily, and his attacks became more and more violent. Whoosh! Amidst the roaring sounds of bullets, a slight whistling sound abruptly appeared on the battlefield. Once again Ramiro was sent flying. His body rose into the air, and he inadvertently raised his head. There was bright sunshine in his sight. In the clear sky, there seemed to be a vague silhouette appearing in his line of sight. It was like an illusion, a little blurry. But the next second, before he was covered by Li Tianlan's attack, his face suddenly changed and he roared, "Be careful, it's a helicopter." In the next second, the bullets converged into a torrent of metal and suddenly fell from the sky. It was densely packed. Bullets danced wantonly on the battlefield, like a storm of metal. Or a rainstorm. Bullet rain. Endless bullets rained down on the Burning Legion on the ground, reaping lives in a frenzy. Under the bright and beautiful sunlight, faint silhouettes appeared in the sky one after another. They were blurry, but the dazzling flames and bullets had already swept through the crowd mercilessly. Such a scene made Li Tianlan's movements slightly stagnate. "This is..." Ramiro's horrified groan rang in his ears with disbelief. "This is AF** King Hyder." Chapter 707. Death swept through the city like a tide. Violent bullets fell densely. The burning legion was everywhere on the ground. It was impossible for tens of thousands of people to form a formation at once, so the nearly endless bullets hardly needed to be aimed. Shooting. Unscrupulous shooting. Modern high-density firepower shrouded the city, creating a storm of death that was even crazier than Li Tianlan's massacre just now. Subtle gunshots were still ringing. Bullets poured down like a torrential rain. At this moment, neither the most elite burning legion nor the rebel army had the ability to fight back in the face of the killing from the air. The concealer. It's the concealer. Not only Ramelin but more and more people cried out with unconcealable horror and panic. The silhouettes in the sky looked extremely blurry. Eventually they completely disappeared in the sky under the increasingly obvious sunlight. Only countless bullets with the aura of death rained down crazily, reaping lives. The concealer. It was not an organization in the dark world. It was the most advanced stealth-armed helicopter in the world today. The concealer was the world's third-generation stealth helicopter. It was smaller than the previous Hunter and Raider, about one-third the size of a conventional armed helicopter. It adopted the most advanced optical camouflage technology, silent engine, zero wind resistance rotors, infrared suppression technology, and the fuselage made of superalloy could absorb noise and heat to the greatest extent and convert them into energy. The structure of double engines and double fuel tanks ensured the concealer's power to the greatest extent. When the engine was running at full power, the concealer's top speed was nearly 700 km per hour, and its diving limit was nearly 900 km per hour. With fully automatic weapons and equipment, each concealer could be said to be the king of low-altitude combat. Each concealer was equipped with 4 machine guns, 6 short-range missiles, and 2 automatic machine guns. It was a war machine armed to the teeth. Once it opened fire, it could crush all the enemies on the battlefield with the strongest firepower while maintaining perfect stealth. At present, among the limited countries in the world that had mastered stealth fighter technology, most of them were still trying to break through the technical bottleneck of the first-generation stealth helicopter. Only 2 countries had matured the technology of the third-generation stealth fighter. The concealer of Star State. The concealer of Jianghu State. These were the only 2 third-generation stealth helicopters in the world, and they were one of the core military secrets of the 2 countries. Compared with the Lurker, Jianghu State's Lurker's camouflage and invisibility were better, while the Lurker was slightly better than the Lurker in terms of extreme endurance and flexibility. The firepower of the 2 sides was almost the same, and both could be said to be the real killing weapons on the battlefield. Ramiro had never thought that after he had angered the military of Jianghu State, his first counterattack against Jianghu State would be from the Lurkers. This was the peak armament that Star State had hidden like a treasure and never sold to the public. How could it appear on the battlefield between the Burning Legion and Li Tianlan now? For a moment, Ramon even wondered if there was some kind of misunderstanding. There had never been an air force in Tiannan, and the reason was not complicated. Annan State could not watch Jianghu State build an air force base for the Freedom Corps, and Jianghu State could not watch the rebels' air force base appear. As for the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and some other forces, their foundation was shallow after all, and they had not reached this step yet. It was precisely because of this that when the Burning Legion attacked Tunin, Ramiro did not do it on purpose. And because of various reasons under the table, he was also sure that the air force of Jianghu State would not respond too quickly or even at all. Now it seemed that his guess was completely correct. As expected, the Lurker of Jianghu State did not show up on the battlefield. But it was the Lurker that appeared on the battlefield. The bullets converged into a violent metal storm that still raged on the entire battlefield. 4 machine guns and 2 machine guns. With sufficient ammunition, it was completely meaningless. To continue this chapter, please turn to the next page. Each Lurker had the firepower of tens of thousands of bullets. What made Ramiro most desperate was that at a glance just now, before the Lurker officially entered the state of invisibility, he saw more than 1 Lurker. At least 3. Or at least, this scale was enough to form a small fleet of helicopters. Star State? How was that possible? The sky was filled with flying streams of light. Countless bullets swept over from all directions, bringing with them a great deal of blood and corpses. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at the armed helicopters that were already out of sight. He was a little stunned. Even he did not expect the scene in front of him. There was no doubt that the arrival of the lurker was the most critical help to him. Under such circumstances, even if the people he sent to the 3 bases did not succeed in the end, with the help of the lurker, he was confident that he could escape unscathed. Li Tianlan felt more relaxed. In the face of a formidable enemy, he did not think about the standpoint of the lurker. He just looked at Ramiro and said flatly, "You should go down and accompany your army." Boom. In the violent roar of the dragon, a fist condensed with great power directly hit Ramiro. Ramiro did not put up any resistance. He let the punch hit him in the chest. The huge impact sent his body flying backward. Ramiro spat out a mouthful of blood, but he had already increased his speed to the extreme. With the force of Li Tianlan's punch, his body burst out with all its strength and pulled away from Li Tianlan. At the same time he shouted, "Fight back! Find all of them and fight back!" For him, the serious situation did not mean that he was bound to lose the war. The Burning Legion still controlled the 3 bases near Tunan City. As long as the position of the lurker was locked down, the raging artillery fire from the 3 bases was enough to destroy everything. The lurker was indeed invisible. But countless bullets were flying, and it was enough to barely determine the general direction of the target. "We are under attack. Requesting backup, requesting backup. Enemy attack, it's the lurker. My God, how could they have this thing? We have suffered heavy losses. Damn it, why is it the lurker?" One voice after another rang out from the communicator at the same time as Ramelin roared wildly. Countless messy voices kept surging, and it was extremely chaotic. Ramiro froze for a moment. Completely out of instinct he asked, "Who's talking?" "This is Jack Senderos, the Dominator. We can't hold on any longer. Damn it, there are so many of them and they are all experts. They are from Emperor Dong's palace and the lurker. They are raiding the 1st base. My God, the experts of the half-step invincible realm are also here. I'm Edmund Gallo and I found Li Baiqian's position. Dominator, there are also lurkers here. Shit, they have electromagnetic weapons and the weapon system of the base is out of order. The 3rd base is under attack and the logistics warehouse is destroyed. There are so many of them and there are also lurkers here. The 3rd base is about to fall and we have suffered heavy losses. Requesting backup, requesting backup." Chaos. The extremely chaotic cries for help almost covered all of Ramiro's consciousness. Ramiro's vision went black and his heart sank to the bottom. 3 lurkers? No, that was not the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing was that the 3 military bases he had high hopes for were also attacked by the lurker. 2 in the 1st base. 3 in the 2nd base. 2 in the 3rd base. Plus the 3 here. A total of 10 lurkers. An air combat team? No, this was AF*King fully organized air squadron. They even used electromagnetic weapons to paralyze the weapon system of the 2nd base. Where on earth did they get so many top-notch weapons? Most importantly, who were they? Gather everyone. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. No matter what, we must defend the base. Ramiro's eyes were bloodshot as he roared, "At all costs." There was no reply. There was silence in the communication channel. In a place where Ramiro could not see, the enemy appeared in the battlefield of the 3 bases and launched a crazy attack. Electromagnetic weapons. This cutting-edge force, which was not too mature, appeared in the 3 bases one after another. The weapon system was completely paralyzed and malfunctioned immediately. Then the communication was cut off. More and more people appeared directly outside the base. In the 2nd base, Lin Yuxian, who was advancing together with Li Baiqian, watched the scene in astonishment. The lurkers were still hovering in the air. The crazy bullets harvested the lives of the Burning Legion and the rebels. Li Baiqian, Lin Yuxian, and the experts of the Li family had broken through the enemy's defense in the absolute chaos and approached the base's command room. However, their powerful combat effectiveness became extremely dim in front of the lurkers in the air. The number of people who raided the 2nd base was the least. But now, with the one-sided battle situation, more and more strange allies rushed into the base. Their combat effectiveness might not be strong, but they were brave and hot-blooded enough. This was the real sacrifice of life and death. They were desperate, as if they were not fighting for victory at all. Their only purpose in coming here was to kill all the elites of the Burning Legion. Lin Yuxian looked at the distant sky, and his pupils suddenly contracted. It is indeed a war. He patted Li Badian with a wry smile and pointed to the distant sky. Look over there. What's that? Li Badian, who was in a daze, turned his head subconsciously. Countless black spots appeared in the distant sky. Because the distance was too far, the black spots were actually blurred. But because there were too many people, the black spots were connected. Even if they were far away, they could still see them clearly with their eyesight. High up in the sky, black dots fell from the sky one after another, forming a straight line. Falling. The black spots fell extremely fast. Finally, when they fell to a certain height, all the black spots stopped almost at the same time. Then a faint grayish-white light lit up in the distant sky. F***CK paratroopers? Li Baiqian's face suddenly changed. Airborne combat. Lin Yuxian looked at the clear sky in the distance and said in a dry voice, that is King invisible transport plane, and there is more than one. Invisible armed helicopters. Electromagnetic weapons. Invisible transport planes. Elite paratroopers. What else was there? The chaos in Tiannan had just broken out, but a mysterious force could not wait to take over the battlefield. That direction, Li Badian suddenly said. You can see it? Lin Yuxian said solemnly, it can almost be said to be the center of the battlefield. When the paratroopers parachute into that position, the distance from the three bases and even from Tunan City is basically the same. So, Li Badian said with a wry smile, that is to say, they at least have a very advanced satellite. He was still smiling, but the joy at the beginning had completely disappeared. This is a war. Lin Yuxian was silent for a moment and muttered to himself, a real war. And they, Li Badian looked at the paratroopers who were still parachuting and the bullets whistling in the air. He subconsciously clenched the great void sword in his hand and solemnly said, they may not be allies. Lin Yuxian shivered, looked at Li Badian and said bitterly, they may also be enemies? To be honest, man, you really make me a little nervous. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 708. Whether it was the Burning Legion, Emperor Dong's palace, or even Zhongzhou State and Annan State, no one expected that the battle in Tunan City would develop to such an extent. With the participation of the hidden fighters, the battle in Tunan City had evolved from a conflict in the dark world to a real war. At this moment, almost everyone in Emperor Dong's palace stopped. In the three military bases, the attack of Emperor Dong's palace gradually slowed down and changed from the original attack to alert. Lin Yuxian, Li Badian, Eagle King, Ning Chenqing, and the members of the Li family who attacked base number 3 all focused on the unknown force that suddenly appeared. They were not necessarily friendly forces. It was easy to come to this conclusion. Because as far as they knew, Emperor Dong's palace did not have such a powerful ally at present. If they were not allies, they were naturally enemies. The battle in Tiannan broke out very abruptly. With the fall of Tunan, the situation in the whole Tiannan became subtle and sensitive. After all, there was no clear ownership of Tiannan. For more than 3 years, Annan State had a rebel army here and Zhongzhou State had a freedom corps here. Why couldn't other countries form other forces here? This was not impossible. Now in Tiannan, any force could intervene, and it was obvious that they were well prepared. The cost of a concealer was around $9,000, and Star Nation had never sold concealers to any forces or countries. If these 10 concealers were not backed by Star Nation, then it could only mean that this force not only had astonishing financial resources, but also had terrifying connections. Although it was difficult to identify the transport plane in the air because it was invisible, it could be guessed from the huge transport capacity and the excellent stealth ability. Air City 326, the world's heaviest stealth transport aircraft. The most important thing was that the Air City 326 had been modified into a manned transport aircraft. In the era when most transport aircraft were carrying heavy firepower weapons, a manned transport aircraft was undoubtedly a luxury. But on a small and medium-sized battlefield, it was a well-deserved surprise weapon. One Air City 326 was enough to carry nearly 900 fully armed paratroopers. Not 900 people, but 900 fully armed paratroopers. Now, with the dense paratroopers landing on the battlefield, the situation of the whole battlefield was changing at a stunning speed. Star State. On the battlefield of base number 1, Ning Chenqing saw more and more paratroopers pouring into the battlefield and said subconsciously, "It doesn't look like it." Eagle King shook his head. The appearance of the Hidden One indeed made people think of Star State, but it would not benefit Star State at all to plot against Tiannan. Not to mention that Zhongzhou State was determined to get Tiannan. Even if they had to give up Tiannan in the end, they would not let Star State get it. Star State would understand this and they would not do such a thankless thing. Halt the attack. Everyone move 80 meters to the west. Everyone be on guard. Eagle King was silent for a moment, then suddenly gave the order. All the elites of Emperor Dong's palace began to move. 80 meters to the west was the most powerful position in the entire base. While maintaining their ability to attack the base's command center, they also occupied a path of retreat. They could attack and retreat at will. Since they didn't know the enemy's background, this was the safest method. Move, retreat, be on guard. Nearly 200 people from Emperor Dong's palace immediately formed a beautiful formation. Oh, looks like there's an expert commanding them. In the sky above the base, the hider hid in the sunlight. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Crazily pouring out firepower, a thin young man in the driver's seat of one of the hider grinned. But they seem to be very nervous. Your Excellency Jiadu, I think you should hurry up. The situation of the number 1 base has been settled. If you haven't arrived at Tunan City by the time we finish the battle, I think I will be attacked by Emperor Dong's palace. Number 1, maybe you can try the combat capability of Emperor Dong's palace? Why don't you try to fire at them? Tut, fire at our brother troops? Is your brain full of lard? When we fight side by side in the future, they will definitely target us. After all, compared to us, they are the direct descendants. I don't believe that His Highness Emperor Dong will favor one and discriminate against the other. But if we fire at our brother troops, we will also be punished, right? What are you talking about? We don't seem to belong to Emperor Dong's palace yet. In the future? Take it easy, buddy. Who knows what will happen in the future? In the noise, a clear and steady order sounded from the communicator. Get out of the stealth state and step up the attack on the number 1 base. I will enter Tunan City in 10 minutes to stabilize the situation. Okay. Number 1 responded lazily and chuckled. All the hitters, attention. Pull up the altitude and get out of the stealth state. At this moment, not only the number 1 base but the other 2 bases and even the hitters above Tunan City all began to climb up. After getting out of the stealth state, the crazy roar of the bullets became more and more violent. Eagle King was slightly stunned. He raised his head and glanced up. One of the hitters slowly flew over and circled around the top of Emperor Dong's palace. In the cockpit, which was much smaller than a regular helicopter, Eagle King clearly saw a thin man waving at him cheerfully. Then he opened fire. Dense bullets swept down from the sky, but they were not attacking Emperor Dong's palace. In an instant, the elites of the Burning Legion around Emperor Dong's palace fell down one after another, and the road to the headquarters was mostly cleared. A large number of paratroopers poured into the base. No one attacked Emperor Dong's palace. Everyone attacked the Burning Legion. After the first batch of paratroopers, the combat capability of the following paratroopers increased significantly. The casualties of the Burning Legion were increasing. Eagle King finally came to his senses. Friendly forces? Although the other side had shown obvious goodwill, he still couldn't believe it. However, the road to the headquarters had been cleared. If he didn't attack now, he would inevitably be looked down upon. After hesitating for a moment, Eagle King decisively waved his hand. Go, occupy the headquarters. The formation of Emperor Dong's palace began to move. The core members rushed to the headquarters, while the others began to disperse. The hitters above them were still hovering, clearing the obstacles for Emperor Dong's palace with the advantage of high altitude and firepower. Huge firepower cover and endless reinforcements kept appearing. Emperor Dong's palace's advance was almost unstoppable. Such a smooth war was beyond everyone's imagination. The biggest reason was that the Burning Legion didn't have enough experts to support it. Ramelin sent most of the experts in the Legion to Yuzhou. He took down Tunan entirely because the elites of the Burning Legion took advantage of the absence of the senior members of the Freedom Corps. Under such circumstances, the 3 bases in Tunan City and even the downtown area of Tunan City were extremely short of high-end combat capability. Their defense was also based on the firepower of the 3 bases and the fact that their own reinforcements would soon gather. To continue this chapter, please turn the page. But Li Tianlan's response was too fast. Before anyone could react, he had already arrived in Tiannan and launched a counterattack. Facing the Burning Legion without any experts, Emperor Dong's palace sent all the experts this time. Li Tianlan didn't have the so-called ordinary elites. Even the elites of Emperor Dong's palace were graduates of the two academies. Their average strength was at the fire-flaming realm. Even though the overall quality of the Burning Legion was no less than that of the Thunderbolt Battalion, it was still a bit of a headache in the face of such a counterattack. They might be able to defeat 10 times or more enemies, but it was a bit difficult for them to deal with the experts who were far fewer in number. When these experts joined forces to charge, they could easily break up their formation. If that was the case, it could only be said that it was a battle of quality against quantity. But the hitters and the airborne soldiers were too crucial. The electromagnetic weapons temporarily paralyzed a large number of weapons of mass destruction in the base. Coupled with the suppression of the aerial firepower of the hitters and the surprise attack of the airborne soldiers, the Burning Legion's advantage in number was completely reduced when they were inferior to Emperor Dong's palace in terms of quality. At this point there was no suspense at all. The Burning Legion kept retreating. 10 minutes. More than half of the elites of the Burning Legion in the number 1 base were lost. Everyone was forced to abandon the base and began to retreat. Almost at the same time, the number 2 and number 3 bases fell one after another. More and more airborne soldiers came. The airborne soldiers in Emperor Dong's palace, who were getting stronger and stronger, completely occupied the 3 military bases. In the number 1 base, Eagle King had already begun to send people to repair the weapon system in the base. When the war came to an end, the old man of the Li family, who was still a little unbelievable, walked out of the headquarters. He looked up at the hitters still hovering in the air with a somewhat solemn expression. Countless paratroopers sensibly did not enter the command room. Countless people gathered outside. But from another point of view, Emperor Dong's palace could also be said to be surrounded by them. Eagle King narrowed his eyes and looked at the hitters in the air. Countless sword intents surged around him, but they were hidden. In his sight, the signal light of the hitters flashed a few times and began to descend slowly. The first one, the second one, the third one. 3 hitters slowly descended and finally landed in front of Eagle King. Eagle King did not move, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. The door of the helicopter opened, and the skinny man who had waved at Eagle King smiled and walked out of the helicopter. He came to Eagle King's side without any guard. "Hi buddy, what's your name?" Eagle King's mouth twitched and he slowly said, "I'm Eagle." Oh. The skinny man nodded and did not say anything. He just pointed to the 3 hitters behind him. "How is it? Are they very powerful?" His tone was a little proud. "Indeed." Eagle King nodded. "Their firepower is very strong." "Then, are you interested in going up and experiencing it?" The skinny man smiled and said, "I mean, how about coming with us to kill the Burning Legion?" Eagle King's eyes almost narrowed into slits. "You? Who are you?" "Oh, I forgot. Let me introduce myself." The skinny man laughed. "I'm from the Angel Holy War. You can call me number 1. I'm the leader of the Angel Holy War." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 709. Angel Holy War. Eagle King had never heard of this organization. He didn't even have a similar name. He had heard of Saint War Angel. She was the strongest combat force of the Vatican, but now it had become a thing of the past. Saint War Angel Arcis of the Vatican was killed by tribulation in the state of coronation and died in Mormons. Now the Vatican, which had been badly injured, had no invincible realm experts. Naturally, the name of Saint War Angel had become nothingness. What about Saint War Angel? Eagle King looked at him carefully. He was sure of one thing again. He didn't know him and had never heard of Saint War Angel. Eagle King turned his head slightly and looked at Ning Qianqing. He was a senior in the Li family, but in Emperor Dong's palace, Ning Qianqing was the real senior. Moreover, he had been staying in the Li family all these years and hadn't been active outside. Maybe Saint War Angel was a force that had emerged in recent years. Maybe Ning Qianqing had heard of it. Eagle King knew his position very well. No matter where the other party came from, the decision at the moment needed to be made by Ning Qianqing. Eagle King was only responsible for the command of this operation. "I've never heard of Saint War Angel either." Ning Qianqing walked over and shook his head. He looked at number 1 and asked directly, "Why are you helping us?" "I'm just following orders," number 1 said with a smile. He was skinny and had dark skin, and he had obvious Anan characteristics. However, he was extremely fluent in Chinese, and his pronunciation was perfect. "Following orders?" Ning Qianqing raised his eyebrows. "Whose orders?" He subconsciously glanced at the three informants that had landed on the ground. The superalloy body of the informant shone with an almost transparent silver radiance under the sunlight, like a steel monster crawling in the light. Most of the paratroopers stood quietly near the informant, motionless in a tight formation, with an indescribable toughness and iron will. A few paratroopers walked up to the informant and began to check its weapons. After confirming that there were no malfunctions, a large airdrop was pushed over, and more than 10 paratroopers began to load ammunition into the informant in silence. Ning Qianqing's mouth twitched. At this moment he keenly noticed the mental state of the other party. Every troop had its own mental state or morale. Different troops, different battles, and different endings would have different mental states. The paratroopers in front of him were undoubtedly elites. If the first batch of paratroopers who stormed the base were just a group of fearless cannon fodder, then the paratroopers who entered the base last were the true elites who had been through hundreds of battles. However, their labels were not the silent and fierce ones of the regular elites, but a kind of fanaticism. It was a fanaticism that bordered on insanity. This fanaticism was expressed in everyone's eyes and made all the paratroopers look like they had an unshakable determination. He took a deep breath, looked at number 1 and asked again, "Whose order?" Number 1 was in a difficult position. He spread his hands and didn't know what to say. After a long time he smiled bitterly. He said softly, "That's not important. The important thing is that from today on, we will only follow the orders of His Highness Li Tianlan. 10 concealers, 4 empty city transport planes, an armed satellite, and more than 2,000 paratroopers would all belong to His Highness Li Tianlan from now on. Lord Ning Qianqing, in other words, we are now on the same side. We need Emperor Dong's palace's trust." What? Ning Qianqing suppressed his inner shock and asked. Apart from everything else, the cost of 10 concealers was nearly $1 billion, not the selling price. The cost of the empty city transport planes was even more expensive than the concealers. As for the armed satellite, it was King armed satellite, not an ordinary satellite. For Emperor Dong's palace, the value of the armed satellite was immeasurable. More than 2,000 elite paratroopers were also what Emperor Dong's palace needed. In other words, if these people could really be trusted, once they joined Emperor Dong's palace, the strength of Emperor Dong's palace would increase exponentially. After a short period of digesting, the overall strength of Emperor Dong's palace would even exceed the strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan and become the third largest force in Tiannan after the Freedom Corps and the Rebel Army. Number 1 opened his mouth and was about to say something, but his body suddenly stiffened and he said respectfully, "Your Highness." Eagle King and Ning Qianqing looked at each other in astonishment. Number 1 looked serious and nodded. "Okay." He took off the communicator from his ear and handed it to Ning Qianqing. He said softly, "His Highness Li Tianlan wants to talk to you." The war broke out in Tunnan City and was about to come to an end. In Tunnan City, it was swift, efficient, thunderous and even destructive. No words could describe the efficiency of this war. 12 minutes after Li Tianlan entered Tunnan City, the lurkers joined the battlefield. 15 minutes after Li Tianlan entered Tunnan City, the Burning Legion completely lost contact with the 3 military bases near Tunnan City. Nearly 10,000 elites of the Burning Legion and nearly 20,000 rebels in the city were completely exposed to the firepower of the 3 lurkers. Gunfire roared in the air. Killing swept across the city. The 3 lurkers that occupied the air played an irreplaceable role in a battlefield of this scale. The surging bullets divided the entire battlefield in the shortest time possible. The elites of the Burning Legion were no longer able to support Ramelin. The ruins of the Tunnan City Hall had completely become a one-on-one battlefield for Li Tianlan and Ramelin. The killing went on. So did the fighting. With the City Hall as the center, everything within a kilometer around it had been completely destroyed. Roads were cracked, buildings collapsed, vehicles exploded, and trees were crooked. This was originally the most prosperous area of Tunnan City, but at this moment, it was as tragic as a garbage dump. Both Li Tianlan and Ramelin were madly venting their power. There was no sword energy or sword light. There was only power. Since entering the secular world, Li Tianlan had never been so crazy. His dual wind and thunder veins had been stretched to the extreme. Dragon Fist, Nocturnal Walking Skill, Hurricane Kick, and all the unique skills of the Li family were constantly blooming in his hands. While the lurker was creating the killing storm, Li Tianlan was suppressing Ramelin. Yes, it was suppression. This was what frightened Ramelin the most. 3 years ago, when the force of the Dark World was at its peak, he was the second on the holy list. Today, even if those invincible realm experts who died or were seriously injured in Eastern Europe were counted, his strength should be enough to enter the bottom of the divine list. But now, facing Li Tianlan, he was completely suppressed. Attack, storm-like attack. Ramelin was surrounded by attacks. At this point, the only thing he could do was to defend. In the almost violent attack, he didn't even have a chance to breathe. This seemed to be the first time that Li Tianlan completely suppressed an invincible realm expert with his own strength. The most important thing was that Li Tianlan hadn't entered the invincible realm yet. What would happen once he broke through that threshold? If he just entered the invincible realm, would his combat capability be barely comparable to that of an expert at the peak of the invincible realm? If he stabilized the invincible realm, would he be evenly matched with an expert at the peak of the invincible realm? When he really reached the peak of the invincible realm, who could be his opponent? Such a terrible possibility was no longer a possibility, but was becoming a fact. In recent decades, only Wang Qianzong seemed to have achieved this kind of terrible, scalp-numbing fact. It was not too much to call him the future chosen one. Now, Li Tianlan, who was only 22 years old, was constantly showing his strength to the whole dark world. Retreat. While retreating helplessly, he ferociously swept his leg and smashed it directly. The shadow of the leg appeared all over the sky in an instant and turned into a storm in an instant. The fierce sound of the wind lifted the dust and gravel nearby. In the obstacles that almost blocked out the sky and the sun, Li Tianlan's every movement had a clear shadow. A kick full of great power landed on Ramelin's chest. With a dull sound, Ramelin's body was knocked into the ruins. Dense cracks appeared on the collapsed wall. The moment the cracks appeared, the whole storm suddenly swept over. With a loud roar, the huge ruins suddenly flew up. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air, and the shining lightning turned into the shadow of a dragon all over the sky, directly surrounding Ramelin in the flying ruins. The dragon's roar shook the sky, and the dull sound of fists hitting flesh reverberated. In the blink of an eye, a large area of ruins was completely blown up. Ramelin's figure was blasted into the air. Before his blood could fall to the ground, Li Tianlan had already grabbed his ankle and smashed him to the ground. The moment his head was raised, Li Tianlan's hard knee hit his nose. As blood flowed wildly, Li Tianlan, who was almost crazy, pounced on him again. Ramelin couldn't imagine how a person could move so fast. This kind of attack frequency that exceeded the limits of the human body didn't even slow down his attack power. His defense was getting more and more strained, and there were more and more loopholes. As he was constantly suppressed, he was getting closer and closer to complete failure. This was no longer a battle. Could even be said to be a naked beating. Li Tianlan's punches and kicks were completely bursting out with a kind of power that wanted to kill him alive. All the unique skills became mere appearances. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to have completely given up all the skills, and his whole body exuded an unimaginable fierceness. He made big moves and destroyed everything with absolute attacks. He was domineering, straightforward, crazy, and unreasonable. This was a kind of violence that had been brought to the extreme. It was simple but invincible. Ramelin was still holding on with all his might. He could fail, but the Burning Legion couldn't. The elites of the Burning Legion and the rebel army were looking for cover all over the city to avoid being chased by the Hidden Ones. They were also looking for opportunities to fight back. Ramelin's communication with the three bases had been completely cut off. But at this time, the cut-off communication became his greatest hope. When he didn't know the specific situation of the three bases, he thought again and again about how powerful the three bases were and how destructive they could be. As long as the elites of the three bases killed the enemy, the Hidden Ones would be out of their invisible state. Once they killed the Hidden Ones, victory would still belong to the Burning Legion. However, Ramelin had changed his mind. As long as there was no threat from the Hidden Ones, he would order all the Burning Legion and the rebel army to besiege Li Tianlan. Could he kill people? Then let him kill them. Even if Li Tianlan was an immortal, he couldn't kill tens of thousands of people. As long as he could kill Li Tianlan, Ramelin would think it was worth it, no matter how heavy the price was. Moreover, his Burning Legion had been trained for many years and had experienced many wars. They were as good as the world-famous Thunderbolt Battalion of Jianghu State. Even if they couldn't stop Li Tianlan, they could still cause him enough trouble. So in the face of the terrible situation, Ramelin gritted his teeth and did everything he could to hold on. After all, he was an invincible realm expert. Even if he was no match for Li Tianlan couldn't kill him in a short time if he wanted to. In the current situation, It was a competition of who could hold on longer. Ramelan's wait finally paid off. But it didn't come from the base. A large number of airborne troops suddenly appeared in Tunan City and began to attack the formation of the Burning Legion. The cannon fodder attracted the firepower, and the real elites entered the field later. The battlefield completely spread to the whole Tunan City. There were fights everywhere. The enemies hiding in the dark couldn't be killed for the time being, but with the support of the firepower on the ground, the whole battle was on the verge of collapse. The war lasted for 45 minutes. Ramelan finally received the fire support from the military base. It was support for Li Tianlan. The artillery fire all over the sky didn't hit the hidden people at all. It all fell into the formation of the Burning Legion and the rebel army. The number of the Burning Legion and the rebel army was getting smaller and smaller, and the formation began to become obviously sparse. Although the direction of the fire support seemed to come from the third base, which had the weakest firepower, the third base's firepower was enough to completely break the already unbalanced balance. Before the surprise rose in his heart, despair had already made Ramelan's heart sink to the bottom. At this moment he gradually couldn't support Li Tianlan's offensive, and the Burning Legion and the rebel army couldn't fight anymore. The situation was hopeless. It wasn't until this moment that he finally realized it. The failure of the 3 military bases made him completely lose the basis for turning defeat into victory. Ramelan's eyes were blood-red. Covered in blood, he looked like a beast struggling for its life. 3 years of secret preparation. More than a month of emergency deployment. The Burning Legion sneaked into Tiannan in batches, bringing the most elite forces and a large number of experts. It was certain that the Burning Legion would become a superpower, but their plan had just begun. Before they had time to enjoy the joy of victory, failure was already at hand. The elites of the Burning Legion suffered heavy losses. The rebel army suffered heavy losses. He had no foundation in Tiannan, and he had lost to Li Tianlan. In such a situation, his bargaining chips with Annan State were also greatly reduced. In other words, all the actions of the Burning Legion in Tiannan this time could be said to be basically fruitless. But at the same time, they suffered heavy losses and provoked a strong enemy. It was a complete failure. The extreme unwillingness almost swallowed all of Ramelan's reason. He gritted his teeth and his face was completely distorted. In just a few seconds he wanted to order the whole army to attack more than once. He wanted to fight to the death with Li Tianlan and all the paratroopers in front of him. But years of calmness finally made him suppress the impulse. In the worsening battle situation, everyone in the Burning Legion heard Ramelan's hoarse and twisted order with strong unwillingness. Burning Legion. Retreat. Retreat. Break through to the south. Yes, retreat. No matter how unwilling he was, the situation had become like this. The last trace of reason made Ramelan make the most important and the most correct decision. Give up. Give up Tunan City, give up the 3 military bases, and even give up some of the elites of the Burning Legion. Retreat. They could only retreat. Ramelan stared at Li Tianlan and roared. He gritted his teeth and turned to break through to the south without looking back. Li Tianlan, whose face was pale but breath was still fierce, sneered. He was about to chase after him when he saw a lurker flying over from afar. The 4th lurker. The lurker didn't turn invisible. It quickly flew over Li Tianlan. The signal light flashed slightly. An incomparably eye-catching streak of bright red drifted down from the cabin door of the lurker. It was a figure covered from head to toe in a red robe. The landing point of the red robe was very clear. It was in front of Li Tianlan. To be exact, it was between Li Tianlan and Ramelan. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and a touch of fierceness flashed in the depths of his eyes. This was the best time to kill Ramelan. In 10 minutes, Ramelan would die in Li Tianlan's hands. If he was allowed to retreat, it would inevitably be a big problem in the future. But without the firepower of the lurker, it would be difficult for him to kill Ramelan with the firepower of the 3rd base alone. His communication with the attackers of the 3 bases had been cut off. So far he still didn't know what had happened. His plan was to directly hit Ramelan at the beginning and then hold up the entire Burning Legion. If Li Badian and others could take down the 3 military bases, their powerful firepower could completely destroy everything in the Burning Legion. If they couldn't take them down for a while, then he would kill Ramelan and the Burning Legion would retreat. But with the appearance of the lurker, the 3 military bases didn't play a role, and the lurker didn't want him to kill Ramelan at this time. Such a victory was inevitable for him. The red robe fluttered in the air and landed in front of Li Tianlan. The 3 lurkers chased after the Burning Legion, still pouring out firepower. Li Tianlan hesitated. Looking at the red robe in front of him, he narrowed his eyes and said nothing. "Greetings, Your Highness." The red robe stood in front of Li Tianlan and bowed deeply. His voice was respectful and calm. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He looked at him and pointed at the lurker in the sky and the airborne soldiers who were chasing after them. "Are these your people?" He looked at the red robe and asked, "Why are you helping me?" "To be exact, from now on they are all your soldiers, Your Highness." The red robe kept bowing and didn't look up. "My people?" Li Tianlan laughed. "What if I let them destroy the Burning Legion and kill Ramelin now?" "No problem." The red robe's voice was low. He kept bowing respectfully. "Your will is above everything. But I think it's better for you to let Ramelin live at this time." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He didn't ask why it was better. He just said quietly, "Who are you?" "Chief Red-Robed Archbishop Chatu of the New Stream." "Greetings, Your Highness." The red robe bowed again and his voice was calm. "The New Stream. Chief Red-Robed Archbishop." Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows with undisguised astonishment. He had heard of the New Stream, but he didn't know much about it. When he was in Eastern Europe, he read the materials of the Vatican and the Eastern Church. It was also then that he heard of the New Stream. Like the Vatican and the Eastern Church, the New Stream was also one of the most influential religious schools. It believed in the same God as the Eastern Church and the Vatican, but its doctrine was somewhat different. The New Stream was mainly concentrated in East Asia and Southeast Asia. In Jianghu state, the New Stream was more influential than the Eastern Church and the Vatican. But internationally, the New Stream was the weakest of the three major schools. Li Tianlan didn't expect that it was the New Stream who helped him this time, and it was the chief red-robed archbishop. Li Tianlan didn't know much about this position. But in terms of position, Chatu should be second only to the two of them in the New Stream. The New Stream was different from the Vatican and the Eastern Church. In the New Stream, the Holy Virgin was above everything, and her position was higher than the Pope. If Chatu was really the chief red-robed archbishop of the New Stream, then his position was second only to the Holy Virgin. The Pope was the third person in the New Stream. Li Tianlan looked at Chatu and was silent for a long time. Things were so weird that his mind suddenly became a little confused. The strength of the New Stream was indeed out of his expectation. But since most of their forces were concentrated in Southeast Asia and East Asia, it was not surprising that they had such a powerful force. But the question was, why would Chatu give him such a powerful force? Concealers and paratroopers, not to mention the New Stream, it would not be easy for the Vatican to give them. This gift was indeed a bit strange. "Your Excellency Chatu," Li Tianlan calmed himself down and said slowly, "Why does the New Stream help me? It is the will of Her Highness the Holy Virgin. It is also the will of His Excellency the Pope." Chatu didn't straighten his back and said with his head lowered, "I don't know them." Li Tianlan said flatly, "Your Highness, you don't have to doubt our sincerity. You may not know the Holy Virgin and the Pope, but we have a key person that you can trust." He took off the communicator on his ear, carefully adjusted the channel, and then handed it to Li Tianlan. "We have blocked most of the communication signals in Tiannan. But in order to hide ourselves, I hope you don't talk too long." Li Tianlan took it, squinted, put on the communicator and said hello. "Tianlan?" A soft and dreamy voice came to Li Tianlan's ears. "How are you now?" Li Tianlan was stunned. At this moment all his doubts disappeared. He raised his eyebrows and seemed to be in disbelief. "You are the Holy Virgin of the New Stream?" "Of course not. I am your woman," Qin Weibai chuckled. Qin Weibai chuckled. "But I was worried that you wouldn't let Saint go to Tiannan with you, so I found someone to help you. The New Stream is our friend. Tianlan, they can be trusted. But at present, the New Stream is still in the stage of hiding its strength, so the weapons and equipment that appeared on the battlefield this time, as well as the airborne soldiers, are not suitable to return to the New Stream. After all, there are too many of them, and if they make a big noise, Annan will easily notice. Except for Chatu, these people will join Emperor Dong's palace and become your soldiers. Of course they are not free. We have to pay the New Stream." "No problem." Li Tianlan was a little confused and he said subconsciously. He looked at the lurker flying farther and farther away. As the situation in Reki City became more and more stable, Li Tianlan was no longer short of money. But things like the lurker could not be bought with money. In addition, there was a group of lurkers about to arrive in Tiannan. Li Tianlan's air power had become more and more powerful. "Well, that's it," Qin Weibai said softly. "Tianlan, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." Li Tianlan shook his head. "Ramiro is no match for me. It's just a small injury and he will recover soon. I know you are the strongest. Qin Weibai smiled softly and said, in this case I suggest not to kill Ramiro for the time being. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said nothing. Qin Weibai said softly, given the current situation in Tianan, you need an enemy who is strong enough but can be suppressed by you. Otherwise many things will become a little troublesome. Tianlan, this time, Emperor Dong's palace has gained a lot. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. This time the gains were indeed great. The strong intervention of the new stream not only changed the situation in Tunan, but also the situation in the 3 military bases. The firepower of the 3 military bases was preserved to the greatest extent. The Burning Legion suffered heavy losses, and Li Tianlan got a few of the most advanced lurkers and the elite airborne soldiers of the new stream. Could be said that his power suddenly expanded. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan believed that the giant group would support him more. As for the academics, it was not a big problem. But the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group would definitely take action. What Li Tianlan valued most were the 3 military bases in Tunan. But now that the situation was like this, Li Tianlan did not want to return Tunan City, which belonged to the Freedom Corps. With Tunan City as the core, the 3 military bases and the upcoming air force would be enough to defend his base camp. In this way, Li Tianlan would have money, manpower, and enough military power. In terms of personal combat capability, Li Tianlan had also proved that he was formidable. It could be said that Emperor Dong's palace had all the conditions for a rising force. The only thing they lacked was the foundation. As he absorbed the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the foundation could be partly made up. That was to say, from now on, Emperor Dong's palace had become the real opponent in the eyes of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group. The two groups would probably use countless small tricks to prevent Li Tianlan from getting what he deserved. Keeping Ramiro, who had suffered heavy losses, would allow him to gain a foothold in Tianan and maintain a certain aggressiveness. Li Tianlan's role in Tianan would become more important. More importantly, Li Tianlan could also take advantage of this to grasp all the power in his hands. As for the reason, it was to fight against the Burning Legion. He could even ask Jianghu State to give him more support. As for whether the support was given or not, it did not matter. At least the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group could do nothing about what he had already grasped. Li Tianlan pondered and did not speak. There's no hurry to take revenge. Tianlan, we haven't gained a firm foothold yet. The most important thing is to settle down. As for the Burning Legion and Ramiro, let them live a little longer, okay? Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he said calmly, I see. He paused and asked, what's the matter with the new stream? Who's their Holy Virgin? The new stream respected the Holy Virgin, but their Holy Virgin had always been the most mysterious. She seemed to be hidden in the clouds and never appeared in public. Most of the time, it was the Pope who handled the affairs of the new stream. This seemed to be similar to the Vatican, but in the new stream the Holy Virgin's position was clearly higher than the Pope. She could be said to be the highest will of the new stream. The fact that Qin Weibai could get in touch with the new stream at least showed that she had a certain friendship with the Holy Virgin. Qin Weibai paused for a moment, but her voice did not sound different. She just said softly, can we talk about this when you come back from this? The Holy Virgin. Well, if there's a chance I'll introduce her to you. Qin Weibai said the last sentence with some reluctance. Li Tianlan said yes. Then I'll hang up. Qin Weibai smiled and cut off the communication. Li Tianlan looked at Jia Tu, who was still bending over in front of him, and suddenly said, stand up straight and talk. Okay. Jia Tu straightened up and looked at Li Tianlan with a calm smile. Are you also going to join Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan asked. I'll go back to the new stream. If I'm alone I can avoid the temptation of Annan State, Jianghu State and other forces. But these followers will be your Highness's soldiers from now on. They are the real fanatics willing to sacrifice everything. Sounds good. Li Tianlan nodded. If your Highness can join the new stream it will be easier to command them. Maybe in the future not only them but more fanatics will fight for your Highness. Jia Tu said respectfully. I'll join the new stream? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, wear the red robe too. As long as you're devout enough, you can become the Pope. Even. He hesitated for a moment. The new stream has a Holy Virgin. Her Highness can also make a Holy Son. Li Tianlan did not give an answer. He just looked at the Burning Legion getting farther and farther away. Catch up. He suddenly said, We can spare Ramiro, but the Burning Legion must pay a higher price. As you wish. Jianghu bowed slightly and said softly, Communication Channel 2 and Your Highness's 7 hidden fighters. They are the Angel Holy War Squadron of the New Stream. Number 1 has taken down the first base and is with His Excellency Ning Qianqing, waiting for your order. Li Tianlan glanced at him and adjusted the communication channel to Channel 2. Number 1? This is Li Tianlan. Your Highness. A calm voice sounded in the communication channel. Are you with Qianqing? I want to talk to him. Li Tianlan said. Okay. Number 1 answered, and then his voice sounded softly. His Highness Li Tianlan wants to talk to you. Tianlan? Ning Qianqing's hesitant voice sounded on the other end of the communication channel. Well, are you okay? Li Tianlan asked. Fortunately, we didn't lose much. Ning Qianqing laughed and was a little confused. What's the matter with these hidden fighters? Li Tianlan could not explain it in a short time, so he just said calmly, they are all on our side now. Tell all the hidden fighters in the 3 bases to gather and hunt down the Burning Legion. I'll leave this to you. Ramiro doesn't have to die, but we must kill as many of their elites as possible. As for the 3 bases, let Eagle King and Badian communicate. We must take control of the bases as soon as possible. Understood. Ning Qianqing responded, sounding a little excited. Li Tianlan hung up the communication channel and turned to look at the ruins in his sight. He was silent for a long time before he said softly, From now on, Tunan is mine. Congratulations, Your Highness. Jianghu smiled and bowed. I believe it won't be long before the entire Tianan is under your light. Chapter 7:10. When he hung up the phone, the sky above Yuzhou City had already lit up. The rising sun shrouded the capital of Jianghu State. In the hospital of the giant group, a lot of cleaning work had come to an end. At this time, the hospital had been completely surrounded by the garrison troops of Yuzhou. A division of troops was stationed here, armed to the teeth, and thousands of elite soldiers were cleaning up the battlefield. The blood had been washed away and the wounded were being placed in batches. Due to some taboo in the sanatorium, there was no morgue. The corpses of the dead began to be transported in batches. The 2 inpatient buildings in the hospital had not completely collapsed, but the cracked stairs were crooked, which looked frightening. All the wounded inside had been picked up and temporarily placed in the staff dormitories of the hospital. The hospital had made contact with an official sanatorium under the control of the giant group, which had begun to send cars to pick up the wounded. An hour ago, Jianghu State Parliament member, Dongqing Wudi, Jianghu State Parliament member Wu Jingmin, Jianghu State Parliament member, and Speaker of Yuzhou Bai Zhanfeng rushed to the hospital on behalf of Jianghu State to express their condolences. Dongqing Rushi, Tribulation for Spirit Generals, and other important figures had been transferred in advance. The 3 high-level officials had left after expressing their condolences and began to prepare for the upcoming high-level meeting. Qin Weibai issued several orders in a row and then waited. Now that everything had a clear result, she, who had been tense all the time, finally breathed a sigh of relief. The room was silent. Military counselor and Saint sat on the sofa in silence. After Flaming Fire left, Horsewoman, whose injury was barely stable, immediately appeared beside Qin Weibai and acted as her bodyguard. The 3 super masters of Samsara Palace had been waiting here, watching Qin Weibai give out orders one by one, but they remained silent all the time. Qin Weibai was also silent. She gripped her phone tightly in her fair hands, lowered her head and didn't move an inch. The golden sunlight outside the window shone on her, and she looked like a beautiful statue bathed in golden light. The atmosphere in the room was extremely solemn. Military counselor wanted to speak several times, but he was stopped by Saint. Everyone was silent. The silence turned into contemplation, then solemnity and finally helplessness. I told you. The military counselor smiled bitterly and said, The new stream is not a good card to play, at least not now, or it will be very troublesome. Saint glanced at military counselor, sighed and said nothing. What can I do? After a moment of silence, Qin Weibai said faintly, I can't just watch Tianlan get into trouble. We all know who is standing behind the Burning Legion. How could the so-called number 1 legion in Africa be so simple? Even if Ramelin is no match for him, the people behind the Burning Legion will not let go of this opportunity. The new stream might not be able to do anything. Even if they show up a little later, the situation may change. I can risk anyone and anything, but nothing can happen to Tianlan. How is Tianan? Saint suddenly asked. The Burning Legion has retreated. Qin Weibai turned around and took 2 steps, sitting opposite the military counselor and Saint. Her dreamy and delicate face looked a little tired. In their own base camp, there is no need to doubt the fighting capacity of the new stream. Saint nodded. It had been about 6 or 7 hours since the Burning Legion raided Tunan City. The Burning Legion occupied Tiannan, and then they were beaten back by Emperor Dong's palace. The sudden outbreak of the war was unimaginably rapid. Once such news spread, it was bound to shock the whole world. But for the few people in the room, it was nothing out of the ordinary. This time the new stream sent a total of 10 concealers for aircrafts, and nearly 3,000 paratroopers. Such an action was like a thunderbolt, which fully demonstrated the strength of the new stream. But the new stream was really not powerful. The biggest reason why the war was so terrifying was that Tunan City was the base camp of the new stream. The base camp of the new stream was not in Tiannan, but in the neighboring kingdom of Tiannan. Tiannan was the most powerful enemy of the new stream and also one of the closest places to Tiannan. Though the new stream was not the state religion in the kingdom of Tiannan, it was strongly supported by the government of the kingdom of Tiannan. The triangle between the kingdom of Tiannan, the kingdom of Siam, and the kingdom of Wanta was the world-famous Golden Triangle. Most of the new stream's power was hidden in that war-torn area. Now that the conflict in Tunan had broken out, the new stream had reacted in the shortest time possible. But that was all. Outside of Southeast Asia, the new stream's power in other areas was pitifully small. To put it bluntly, there were 6 red cardinals in the new stream. Except for the chief red cardinal, Chatu, who was a master of the half-step invincible realm, the last 3 red cardinals were only in the fire-flaming realm. And their most important armed organization was the Holy War of Angels. Yes, it was the Holy War of Angels that appeared in Tiannan tonight. It represented more than half of the armed forces of the new stream. Backed by the base camp, they used more than half of their resources. That was how the new stream showed its power to everyone today. With this kind of power, he could naturally help Li Tianlan defeat the Burning Legion. But there was only one problem. How are you going to explain it? Military counselor asked in a hoarse voice. He didn't look panicked, but there was obvious helplessness on his face. Qin Weibai didn't say anything. She turned her head slightly. Her perfect and flawless face looked a little pale in the sunlight. After a long time she breathed softly and said, "I don't know." She couldn't explain it. The new stream couldn't explain it either. The Holy War of Angels joined Emperor Dong's palace. As the palace master, Li Tianlan would definitely study the power of the new stream. He would also show his support to the new stream and even meet the Holy Virgin of the new stream. But the problem now was that Li Tianlan couldn't meet the Holy Virgin of the new stream. And the Holy War of Angels was too important for the new stream. What kind of relationship did they have with Qin Weibai that made the new stream send more than half of its power to Emperor Dong's palace? There were too many things that couldn't be explained. Once there were too many of these things, some seemingly perfect lies would reveal flaws. The worst part was that there was almost no way to make up for such flaws. As long as Li Tianlan sensed something wrong and investigated carefully, he would find the truth behind all the perfection. Choose a new Holy Virgin? Horsewoman asked tentatively. Choose a new Holy Virgin? Qin Weibai smiled helplessly. The Pope won't agree. And the successor has been sent to Kunlun City. Now we don't have a suitable candidate. Anyway, we have to keep this a secret. Saint said in a low voice, or he'll go crazy. Oh. Military counselor's voice was a little sharp. We shouldn't have used the new stream. It's not the right time. What else can we do if we don't use the new stream? If His Highness doesn't let Saint go to Tiannan, what about his safety? We're not worried about the Burning Legion but the master behind it. If the new stream doesn't do anything, His Highness can deal with the Burning Legion, but he may not be able to deal with the enemy hiding in the dark. Horsewoman said coldly. Military counselor had been acting weird recently, and she naturally knew why. To some extent. She understood his loyalty and stubbornness, just like she understood Flaming Fire's loyalty and stubbornness. But respecting the original plan was also a kind of loyalty. Military counselor's position in the Samsara Palace was not just a role to complain. Military counselor glanced at Qin Weibai and said no more. Horsewoman stood up, poured a glass of warm water, and gently handed it to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai thanked him and held the glass in her small hand, saying nothing. The shallow rim of the glass reflected the lines of Qin Weibai's face. Horsewoman lowered her head, watching the clear warm water slightly moving in the glass. The trembling was so subtle, but it was real. It was uneasiness and confusion. Qin Weibai had no choice. How could she not know that it was the best choice for the new stream to hide in her hands? If the force that appeared in Tianan joined Emperor Dong's palace, it would certainly increase the power of Emperor Dong's palace. But the sudden change in status would not only test the mentality of the people inside Emperor Dong's palace, but also put Li Tianlan under more pressure while accepting the growth of his strength. But if these forces were hidden in her hands, there would not be such a problem. She belonged to Li Tianlan, so her power naturally belonged to Li Tianlan. Now that this force was exposed, at least the position of Emperor Dong's palace in Jianghu state was enough to produce many subtle changes in the current situation, not to mention whether the new stream would be exposed or not. But the problem was that Qin Weibai had no time to care about that. Li Tianlan didn't let Saint go to Tianan with him because he was worried about the hospital. Qin Weibai didn't insist because she was not sure if Saint could change the situation. This was the first time she worked for Li Tianlan's safety. She was careful and didn't care about hiding anything. She wanted everything to be foolproof. For now, she didn't want a newly developed Samsara palace to really face the force behind the Burning Legion. This was different from Li Tianlan sweeping the Wang family of Beihai alone. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, he was alone. If he swept Beihai and Zhongzhou state wouldn't suffer too much loss. But the confrontation between the two forces was the overall situation. A newly formed Emperor Dong's palace couldn't take any advantage. Once this happened, Qin Weibai had to use more trump cards to make up for it. Compared with the new stream, the cards in her hands were obviously more important and not mature enough. So Qin Weibai hoped that Li Tianlan would only target the Burning Legion. To achieve this goal, the best way was to let the master behind the Burning Legion see no hope of turning the tables. Qin Weibai had concerns, but how could the people behind the Burning Legion not have them? If they really looked into it, commanding the Burning Legion to attack the Freedom Corps and raiding Yuzhou was a real crime of treason. Under the situation where the defeat was certain, they didn't dare to expose themselves and could only continue to hide. Yes, it was hiding. Qin Weibai didn't think that there were any other masters in the Burning Legion except for Ramiro. Maybe Ramiro thought so, but Ramiro himself didn't know what else was hidden in his legion. Maybe any inconspicuous soldier in the Burning Legion was a master of the Thundershocking realm or even a half-step invincible realm. This kind of unstable factor was good for Ramiro in the war. But for Li Tianlan it was a time bomb. Even if he could suppress Ramiro, he was bound to go all out. At that time, it would be hard for Li Tianlan to protect himself in the face of a sneak attack from one or two or even more masters at the peak of the Thundershocking realm or a half-step invincible realm. Qin Weibai didn't intend to provoke them at the moment, nor did she want to draw them out. The best way was to not let them take action. As long as there was no hope, they naturally wouldn't take action. So Qin Weibai put pressure on the new stream. The Angel Holy War arrived at the battlefield at the fastest speed. The military armed satellites carried out accurate reconnaissance. The hidden ones swaggered through the streets. The invisible transport planes landed on the battlefield with a large number of airborne soldiers. Such a situation basically eliminated all the possibilities of the Burning Legion to turn the tables. The hidden forces in the Burning Legion would naturally continue to hide. No matter how unwilling they were, they had to accept this failure. The only thing Qin Weibai wanted to do was not to let anything happen to her man. That was all. As for what Li Tianlan would suspect if the new stream was exposed, and how she would explain it, she didn't have time to think about it during the race against time. Since the new stream has appeared, let's make the best use of it. Saint suddenly said, I suggest we communicate with the Plenitude State. Now the Plenitude State and Tianan have deployed military forces on the border. If Emperor Dong's palace can occupy Tunan City, we can build an air force base on the border of the Plenitude State. With the air force, Emperor Dong's palace can truly gain a foothold. I'll arrange it. Qin Weibai took a sip of water and said softly, If your highness really notices something in the future, I think we'd better have a reasonable explanation. Military counselor said blandly. There's nothing to explain. Qin Weibai put down the cup and smiled. Her voice was a little sad. In the worst case, I'll just tell him that I'm the virgin goddess of the new stream. Tianlan won't kill me. He won't kill you, but how are you going to clean it up? Military counselor looked straight into Qin Weibai's eyes and asked. Worst, I'll just be abandoned again. Qin Weibai smiled softly. Her voice was extremely quiet. Military counselor stopped talking. Saint and horsewoman also fell silent. The three heavenly kings looked at Qin Weibai and suddenly felt sorry for her. Everyone had a different fate and everyone would encounter different things. But it seemed that she had been abandoned all her life. She had been abandoned by her biological parents. She had been abandoned by her adoptive parents. She had been abandoned by herself in Eastern Europe. Everything seemed to have become a habit. She had long been numb, so she had enough psychological preparation from the very beginning. "I'm tired." She was silent for a while and suddenly said softly. Saint sighed and stood up. "I'll go to the sanatorium with the wounded. During this time I'll stay in Yuzhou to watch over them." His figure slowly disappeared in the room. Military counselor did not speak. In the slightly twisted air, his figure was also rapidly fading and eventually disappeared without a trace. Horsewoman sat next to Qin Weibai, glanced at her and asked, "Do you want breakfast?" She paused then added, "Boss." Qin Weibai shook her head gently. Horsewoman stood up and walked out. Behind him, Qin Weibai sat there quietly, looking at the sunshine outside the window. Horsewoman at the door looked back at her. The sun still shrouded her perfect body. In the bright pale golden light and shadow, her figure looked extremely lonely and at a loss. When the Burning Legion retreated, the whole Tiannan was instantly turbulent. No matter how fast the news was transmitted, it needed a process. The Burning Legion occupied Tunnan City. When everyone was watching Zhongzhou State and what Emperor Dong's palace would do, every force in Tiannan received the news of the Burning Legion's retreat almost at the same time. They were dumbfounded. Everyone listened to the information that was like a fairy tale with their mouths agape. As of 9 o'clock in the morning, the Burning Legion occupied Tunnan City for the 7th hour. The Burning Legion came. The Burning Legion retreated. Before people could recover from the news that they occupied Tunnan and seemed to be rising, a large number of elites of the Burning Legion had been chased out of Tunnan like stray dogs. Bang! When the door was pushed open, Daybreak was still in a daze. He had expected that Li Tianlan's counterattack would be extremely fierce, but he did not expect it to be so fierce. It had not been long since he arrived in Tiannan from Lin'an. Before he even had a specific plan, the Burning Legion had been defeated. The sound of the door hitting the door frame woke him up. He came to his senses, and there was a touch of surprise on his handsome, almost enchanting feminine face. It was a thin middle-aged man who pushed the door open. He was the deputy hall master of Sanluo Hall in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He was one of the first people who faked death to enter the Purgatory of Heaven capital from the border. His code name was Grey Darkness. He had been loyal to Li Guangtu over the years and could be said to be Daybreak's most important assistant. Daybreak looked at Grey Darkness and Grey Darkness also looked at him. The two looked at each other for nearly 5 minutes, and then Daybreak slowly said, "What's going on?" What's going on? Not only Daybreak but probably countless forces in the dark world were asking this question at this time. How do I know? Grey Darkness said angrily, "Now the situation is very obvious. We don't need to care about how it happened. The fact is the fact. The Burning Legion was defeated." Action. Daybreak's brain was a little slow. What else? Grey Darkness said helplessly, "Chess Emperor can't die in vain. The Purgatory of Heaven capital should also show its strength. We can't let that little guy think that he can really easily annex the Purgatory of Heaven capital." When Li Tianlan was very young, Grey Darkness left the border. He naturally had no feelings for Li Tianlan. Moreover, he followed Li Honghe to the border to avenge Li Guangtu. As a loyal follower of Li Guangtu's position in his heart had long been higher than Li Honghe's. Li Tianlan, who was not recognized by Li Guangtu, naturally had no weight in his heart. Daybreak took a deep breath and asked, "How are the preparations going?" "Almost." Grey Darkness said, "The Sanluo Hall is ready. In addition there are 200 elites, which is our strongest force in Tiannan. Their average strength is at the fire-flaming realm. 300 people are enough to surprise the Burning Legion." "Is Ramelin dead?" Daybreak suddenly asked. "I don't know, but I don't think he's dead." "That's good. We can kill him with our own hands." Grey Darkness grinned grimly. "Anyway, he is in the invincible realm. How can he be killed so easily? The little guy is known as the future Heavenly Son. What is he now? He should be close to killing Ramelin. But according to his previous performance, Ramelin is not doing well. Otherwise he wouldn't have retreated. It just so happens that you have also entered the invincible realm. This is an opportunity. We will set off immediately. You can kill Ramelon to establish your prestige. Daybreak shook his head with a bitter smile. Don't underestimate Li Tianlan. If I were in my peak state, I might not be his match. Is there any specific news from Tunan City? Have all our people lurking there been wiped out? How on earth did the Burning Legion lose? I can't be at ease if I don't figure it out. They are still there, but we can't get in touch with them at the moment. The signal near Tunan City has been completely blocked, so we can't see what's going on there at the moment. Maybe Annan knows what's going on, but our relationship with them has been very stiff recently, so... Grey Darkness shrugged. Daybreak frowned and said nothing. There's nothing to worry about. Grey Darkness said blandly, if the Burning Legion takes Tunan City, they will already have the foundation of a superpower. But even if they retreat this time, as long as they are not completely wiped out and Ramelon is alive, Annan will fully support the Burning Legion to establish a foothold in Tiannan, because they have no choice. So not only us, but other forces also don't want to see a new superpower rise in Tiannan. Everyone can play this game. Although I can't get the news from Tunan City, other free forces such as the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, and the Jianghu family of South America are ready to take action. With us leading the way, everyone will not sit still. There is no need to worry about fighting the Burning Legion that has just lost a battle. I'm worried about Li Tianlan, Daybreak said with a wry smile. That's even more unnecessary. After all, the little guy's surname is Li. Even if His Highness doesn't approve of him, if he dares to touch the Purgatory of Heaven capital, as long as he dares to kill one person, he can forget about annexing the Purgatory of Heaven capital in the future. We helped them block the retreat route of the Burning Legion, and the little guy should thank us. Daybreak was silent for a while, took a deep breath, and finally made up his mind. Let's go. Grey Darkness grinned and turned around directly. 5 minutes later, amidst the chaotic footsteps, hundreds of SUVs rushed towards the direction of Tunan City in a mighty manner. Almost at the same time, the elites of the Shadow Throne, the Heroes Club, and the Jianghu family of South America also began to set off. Beating a drowning dog was something that everyone loved to do. For these superpowers, the rise of every new superpower meant the shrinkage of their existing interests, especially when most of the superpowers temporarily lost the protection of invincible realm experts. In the face of the Burning Legion with Ramelon, too many people hoped that it was just a flash in the pan in Tiannan. Retreat. 55 minutes after the war broke out in Tunan, the Burning Legion finally began to retreat. The lurker, who was out of the invisible state, kept rising and finally reached the limit of the machine gun's range. At this height, it was out of the attack range of most invincible realm experts. The lurker, who had the absolute advantage in the air, chased after the Burning Legion unhurriedly and fired wildly. The formation was in complete disarray. The Burning Legion rushed out of Tunan with the rebel army. Almost everyone rushed south without Ramelon's orders. Everyone knew that their reinforcements were already on the way. If they could meet up with the reinforcements, they might even have a chance to fight. Ramelon had been guarding at the back of the Burning Legion, playing the role of the retreat. He was the commander of the Burning Legion, and no matter how reluctant he was, he had to stand there. It was not only because of the lurker in the air, but also because of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's move of burning heaven in the crowd had traumatized him too much. At this time, if Li Tianlan caught up with them and did the same thing in the dense retreat, the morale of the Burning Legion would probably completely collapse. After all, no matter how elite they were still human beings and knew fear and retreat. Bullets whistled all over the sky. Ramelon kept opening his domain to block the whistling bullets. His physical strength was declining rapidly, but he still gritted his teeth and held on. The Burning Legion he had brought with him were all elites. It would be a good thing if one less died. If all of them died here today, the strength of the Burning Legion would be weakened by almost a third. No matter what, even if he had to risk his life, Ramelon would try his best to protect this group of people. This would be his biggest trump card in the future rise in the Dark World. Out of Tunan, it was the wilderness that could be seen everywhere in Tiannan. The sky was high and the earth was wide. Ramelon, whose physical strength had been exhausted, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He roared, "Attention, Burning Legion! Scatter and retreat. Gather at the third location. Hurry, hurry, hurry." With his voice, the Burning Legion and the rebels didn't do anything. An obvious whistling sound rang out again. The rotors rotated in the air. The delicate and small lurker flew at a high altitude and swooped down at an incredible speed. The machine gun and extremely powerful sound roared wildly. Bullets. For a moment, everyone's eyes were filled with bullets flying wildly. 1, 2, 5, 8, 10. There were a total of 10 lurkers. The lurkers of the 3 military bases had completely converged. They followed the burning legion and kept firing. The momentum was incomparably fierce. At the same time, burning shells flew from afar and smashed into Ramelan's domain. The roar of the explosion filled everything. That was the direction of the second military base. The second military base was the military base with the fiercest firepower among the 3 bases in Tunan. Obviously, after the base fell into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace, they had completely removed the influence of electromagnetic weapons and repaired the weapon system. The heavy firepower that Ramelan had given to the rear to defeat Li Tianlan continued to bombard the burning legion, causing a large number of explosions in the battle formation. Li Tianlan didn't chase after them. However, the endless artillery fire combined with the attacks of the lurkers was endless. With such a chase, the burning legion couldn't even find their target. The lurkers? They couldn't hit them at all. The second military base? It was dozens of miles away from here. Without a target, they didn't even have a chance to fight. The only thing they could do was retreat, escape, and hide. Eventually, they would be bombarded into flesh and blood under the increasingly intense artillery fire. The scene of a fiasco was never pleasant to watch. But for the victors, there was an indescribable sense of heroism. At 11 o'clock in the morning. In just a few hours, the burning legion had been running all the way. They were far stronger than the elites of most armies, and in just 2 hours, they had covered a distance of almost 60 kilometers. It was just that the majestic retreating army had now become sparse and scattered. Tens of thousands of rebel soldiers were completely wiped out after distancing themselves from the burning legion. The frenzied slaughter continued to spread. Starting from Tunan, the wilderness of nearly 100 kilometers was completely dyed red with blood. The burning legion's 9,000 elites were reduced to less than 3,000. They abandoned all the bodies of the dead and even abandoned the wounded. They fled all the way. At this moment, all the ammunition of the lurkers had been completely consumed, and the burning legion had officially escaped the range of the second base's firepower. The lurkers stopped, circled in the air fearlessly, and began to return to Tunan. Ramon supported his body with all his might to prevent himself from falling. He kept panting as he watched the lurkers return in the sky, getting farther and farther away. Looking at the corpses and blood on the ground behind him, he finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. "Commander!" Everyone in the vicinity rushed over to support Ramiro. Ramon's body trembled. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'm fine. Let's go back." "Where else can you go?" A laughing voice suddenly sounded in the sky. "Your Highness Ramon, why don't you come with me to the purgatory of heaven capital?" Ramon suddenly raised his head. Everyone looked up at the same time. Daybreak and gray darkness appeared in the sky. A thin but extremely clear domain spread out from Daybreak's body, covering nearly 100 meters around Ramon. Daybreak looked down at Ramon with a cold gaze. In the distance, hundreds of figures appeared in the burning legion's sight. Without hesitation they charged. The dark Azura temple was in front, and the ordinary elites were behind. A crazy charge. There was finally a flash of despair in Ramon's eyes. Purgatory of heaven capital. He roared with the last of his strength. Daybreak smiled and said calmly, "Since you don't want to go back with me, I'll send you on your way." The domain of hundreds of meters suddenly twisted as he attacked. The entire space was turbulent and became blurred in an instant. Blood sprayed wildly in the burning legion's formation. The domain continued to compress and directly pressed toward Ramon. "Watch out!" A furious roar suddenly sounded behind Daybreak. Daybreak's expression changed, but it was too late to move. The next second, a huge impact directly hit Daybreak. Gray Darkness's whole body rushed over and knocked Daybreak away. Swish! The sword light flashed on Gray Darkness's body for a moment. Bang! With a dull explosion, Gray Darkness's whole body directly collapsed into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The two extremely faint sword lights paused for a moment and disappeared instantly. Gray Darkness. Daybreak's eyes suddenly turned red. If he hadn't been knocked away by Gray Darkness just now, he might have been the one torn apart by the sword light. Daybreak roared wildly. The domain completely broke out and swept in all directions. In an instant, Two subtle sword intents that could almost deceive the perception of an invincible realm expert suddenly condensed together and directly pierced Daybreak's heart. The two swords combined. The invincible strike. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.